Chapter 321. It had been a thrilling match. Gryffindor beat Ravenclaw, yet in the end, it was Slytherin who took the Quidditch Cup. The Weasleys exploded onto the pitch like gods descended. Ron seemed suddenly enlightened, blessed by luck. With a single dragon tail move, he held the goal and blocked several Ravenclaw shots in succession. Ginny, carrying Harry's determination, plucked the snitch from the sky, snatching it from under Cho Chang's nose and securing the match for Gryffindor. "We were only 20 points away from losing," Daphne breathed out at last. She'd been holding it in since the first whistle. Malfoy coughed twice. If he hadn't been careless in his last match against Cedric, the standings wouldn't have been so close. Even with the Weasleys' explosive performance, they couldn't shake Slytherin's established dominance. In the overall house table, Slytherin led by 20 points and claimed this year's cup. Montague nearly raised his wand in a curse when he saw the Weasley girl chasing the snitch, Pansy scolded. If we'd been overtaken, he'd have gone mad. "It doesn't matter now," Malfoy muttered. "We preserved Hogwarts' longest winning streak." John looked at Malfoy. If they had lost, he felt certain Montague would have come for Malfoy first. Gryffindor had won the match, but Slytherin still held the cup. Ron's heroics prompted Angelina to declare she'd made the right choice. The celebrations wound down, the Quidditch Cup was over, and exams loomed. The rest of Hogwarts retreated to the library for weeks of study, everyone but John. Silverhand Manor. Tangmi watched his boss and asked, "Sir, when I was your age I could never imagine skipping school every day." John glanced at him. "You know what I'll say, right? If I'd been called Johnny Silverhand back then," Tangmi sighed, "I probably wouldn't have wanted to go to school either." As a loyal subordinate, he knew better than to judge John by ordinary standards. With less than 2 weeks until exams, other students crammed, desperate for extra brain power. John didn't bother. He left Hogwarts and came home to Silverhand Manor. Even Tangmi worried about his academic future. He needn't have. John walked into the little chamber of secrets tucked away in the garden. A glass case held Helga Hufflepuff's cup securely sealed. A separate container for the souls already brimmed with hundreds of them. He released the soul container. Souls, return. John twirled his wand. The gathered souls, like silkworm cocoons, began to unspool. He drew out threads of essence and collected them carefully. In the room of requirement, a Dementor hung listless, half petrified. The Dementors and the soul-eating curse were in a balance. So long as enough Dementors remained, the curse could not break free. After collecting the souls, he turned to Helga Hufflepuff's cup. He opened the case. This time, the cup gave no immediate sign of resistance. It seemed subdued. "The Gryffindor sword is incredibly sharp. Ravenclaw's diadem increases wisdom, and you, Helga Hufflepuff's cup?" John murmured, staring at it. He reached out and touched the cup. The instant he made contact, a violent magical fluctuation burst from the cup. A glint flashed through John's eyes. He wrapped the cup in stronger magic. The silver ring around his right hand and the crystal in it generated a magnetic field. Thousands of black threads shot toward Helga Hufflepuff's cup, and a keening scream struck at his soul. John held his breath as the threads wrapped the cup. "You should hand this thing over," he whispered. The cup shrieked, "No, impossible! How can you?" John waved his wand and called the Dementor souls to him. Interlaced with the black threads appeared silver strands of soul fragments. Each silver thread sharpened into a scalpel and began to cut through the Horcrux. Lord Voldemort's fragment inside the cup fought back wildly. Even split, the Dark Lord's remaining portion was viciously aggressive. John drew in a focused breath. "Souls, return." His voice lowered into something strange and ancient. The syllables made the collected souls tremble. Above the cup, a small green serpent coalesced and then rearranged itself into the shape of a handsome young man. The youth's limbs were bound by black threads, and the silver scalpels sliced at his flesh as he clung to the cup. "As a soul, you cannot contend with me," John said, his tone slow and deep. He kindled the gathered souls with his wand. The silver threads flamed gold and surged toward the cup. John's eyes narrowed to vertical slits as he pierced the Horcrux's essence, reading its core. More and more souls flared, and the cup's screams grew thin. With a final, concentrated pull, he wrenched the fragment free. The small green snake uncoiled into a drifting spirit and tried to flee. John extended his wand and spun threads of soul to bind it. As the creature's roars and resistance dwindled, John dragged the fragment into an unknown void. Exhaustion overcame him. He collapsed heavily. Color drained from his face and a flicker of black shadow ran beneath his skin. Chapter 350, Horcruxes and Anomalies, Malfoy Manor. The white peacocks that had once roamed the grounds were gone. Inside, the manor remained ostentatiously luxurious, marble fireplaces, gilded mirrors, and purple wallpaper, yet a rotting gloom had settled over it. A mist had lingered within the house for a year. No one knew how many vile things now prowled its halls. Lucius Malfoy sat nervously at one end of the long table. Rippy, disguised as Zhuo Geng, had managed to secure a seat among them. The Death Eaters who had returned from Azkaban clustered around their master, all bearing the weight of his temper. Lord Voldemort was in a foul mood. Even his most loyal, like Bieber, kept their heads low and dared not meet his eyes. "Who can tell me?" Lord Voldemort began, fixing his gaze on Lucius. "Lucius, tell me, what is the most important thing we must do?" Lucius's body trembled. He swallowed hard, voice thin. "Master, we must go to the Department of Mysteries and retrieve that thing." "You are wrong, Lucius." The correction hit Lucius like a blow. He flinched violently. Before the fear could fully register, Voldemort continued, cold and sharp. "Only Harry Potter can retrieve that thing. We need Harry Potter." The Death Eaters listened in silence as Voldemort's voice climbed with agitated malice. "And that Johnny Silverhand who opposes us, he's like a rat in the gutter, always skittering back into my path. I want him crushed." The room felt tighter. Lucius, nearest to him, found it hard to breathe. Then the malice shifted, smoothing back into a calmer tone. "After we get the thing, we will crush that rat." The plan was set: lure Harry Potter to the Department of Mysteries and seize whatever Voldemort wanted. How to draw Potter there? Voldemort had an answer. He looked at the only person present who was not a Death Eater. "Narcissa, I need you to do something for me." Under that cold, serpentine stare, Narcissa felt a chill, but she was not Lucius. She inclined her head slowly. The meeting broke up. Lucius cast a worried glance at his wife. Narcissa's hand warmed at his squeeze. "Be careful," Lucius whispered. "Never defy the master." Narcissa shot him a fierce look at being called coward. Lucius, having said his piece, hurried away with worry written on his face. Narcissa kept her composure and prepared to obey Voldemort's orders. But as the Dark Lord began to speak again, his face changed. For a heartbeat, Narcissa thought he had lost consciousness. He staggered and braced himself on the table. "Dark Lord?" she asked quietly. Voldemort's eyes showed something like confusion and surprise. He felt as though part of him had slipped away. "This is the second time." His expression was unpredictable now. He did not know what had happened. It had never occurred before, and its suddenness alarmed him. His first thought was of a Horcrux, but no, this was different. Even if a Horcrux were damaged, the sensation shouldn't be like this. What had happened? "Helga Hufflepuff's cup, what exactly is it?" Voldemort whispered, a thread of unease threading through his voice. Chapter 322. The Helga Hufflepuff cup at Gringotts was missing, and Lord Voldemort still didn't know who had taken it. As the Dark Lord, he shouldn't have been feeling unsettled. Fear was supposed to be one-sided. The moment of weakness was fleeting. Once he composed himself, a lethal edge flickered across his gaze toward Narcissa. Someone had seen him in that state. His first impulse was to kill the witness. But Narcissa was Lucius's wife and Bellatrix's sister, a necessary pawn for the plan. Voldemort swallowed the killing intent and calmly told her to come closer. He whispered a secret into her ear. Narcissa's expression never changed, but as she left the room, a small, odd look crossed her face. What a coincidence, she thought. Johnny Silverhand and Lord Voldemort using the same scheme. Too absurd. John woke slowly, sitting up and rubbing his forehead. Tangmi hadn't shown himself. Nobody was allowed into this place. The first thing John did was take out his pocket watch and check the time. Had a night passed? His throat itched. He coughed violently and spat a mouthful of black blood onto the floor. He stared at it, running the hours through his head. Very cautious. By the time this is discovered, the rescue window will have passed. He murmured with interest. This brain is more useful than Crabbe and Goyle's. Perhaps from splitting his soul so many times, Lord Voldemort seemed to lack some of the Dark Lord's wisdom. Still, He wasn't simple. He'd forced the Ministry of Magic to its knees. On the surface, Crabbe and Goyle had been sent as Death Eaters to poison John, but another hand had been arranged as well. A two-pronged strategy. On the unpleasant side, you've done well, Tom. John wiped the black blood from his mouth with his sleeve. The Helga Hufflepuff cup lay on the ground. When he picked it up, its chill and malevolence had faded. Helga Hufflepuff's cup, he muttered, fingers tracing the rim. Something left by Hufflepuff shouldn't be ordinary. He tapped the cup lightly and closed his eyes, feeling for its magic. After a moment, he opened them, surprised. The craftsmanship rivals the Gryffindor sword. Like Ravenclaw's diadem, it contains a particular kind of enchantment. With the cup tucked away, John now had 2 of the 4 founders' relics. The remaining Slytherin locket should be at Grimmauld Place. The Horcruxes were clear, and a smile curved his lips. "Tom," he said softly, "I think we're about to meet." By noon the next day, he walked out of the Chamber of Secrets. The black, long-eared owl Riddle was dozing comfortably in the lavender garden, Basil equally placid nearby. Basil saw John and flapped over. John took an envelope from the owl's beak and opened it. Pleasant surprise lit his face. He burned the letter to ash. Tang Mi entered the garden and exhaled in relief when he saw John. He inclined his head respectfully. "My lord, old Barty has come to visit." "Well, that's convenient." John straightened his clothes and smiled. He had been planning to look for him anyway. He brushed a hand across his face and a silver mask slid into place. Johnny Silverhand returned. "Prepare some refreshments for me." "The ones you gave Oz Healed last time were good," Tang Mi said, his usually stern face flushing. He coughed and added, "Those refreshments were bought by your subordinate. If you didn't buy them at 1/10 of the raw material cost, I might have praised you," John said, glancing at him. Tang Mi fell silent. He feared for his pay if he pushed too far. In the study, old Barty sat with his short gray hair immaculately neat. "Old Barty, I haven't congratulated you yet." John entered and shook the minister's hand. The most popular minister in nearly 20 years. Old Barty laughed openly. Once John sat, he spoke plainly. "I'm here on official business. Parts of the ministry need repair and renovation." "As far as I know, the ministry doesn't have the budget for that," John said, fingers steepled. "That used to be the case," old Barty admitted. "But we've saved on equipment maintenance, and a few forgetful fools finally paid their taxes." He gestured vaguely. Those fools were hardly fools, just wary of him keeping them honest. Between savings and overdue payments, the ministry had some spare funds. Old Barty no longer had to squint at the magical creature's fountain statue, wondering when to dismantle it for coin. When old Barty mentioned renovating the ministry, a predatory glint flickered in John's eyes. "Old Barty, I have a suggestion that could save you a great deal of money." Old Barty's expression shifted. He liked being friends with Johnny Silverhand, straightforward, sincere in his way. Johnny had once openly declared his intention to undermine Dumbledore and had laid out the tangible benefits. Old Barty knew Johnny was ambitious and cunning, but those benefits had been tempting. "Mr. Silverhand," old Barty said, watching the mask as if he could see through it, "what exactly do you want?" "If you have deep pockets, such work is meaningless to you," John said. Old Barty smiled wryly. "Don't tell me you want to be friends with me. My son is in your hands. That alone is enough to make me comply." Never underestimate old Barty. He understood that their relationship was bound up with mutual interest. He looked up, meeting the masked man's gaze. "Tell me, what do you want to do?" John was silent for a moment. "Do you really want to know, old Barty?" he asked. "If you don't tell me, I'll be left with nothing but suspicion and fear," old Barty replied honestly. John chuckled, then looked down at the silver ring on his finger. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand to his face. He was going to remove his mask. Old Barty's eyes widened until he held his breath. Slender fingers peeled the mask away piece by piece. Old Barty forgot to breathe. He stared at the young face revealed. The thin, bloodless cheeks and those brown eyes he had seen before made him dizzy. "We've met," he murmured. "Yes, at last year's Triwizard Tournament. I remember you." "John Wick," old Barty said with difficulty, as if the name itself were unreal. Who could have expected the student from Hogwarts and the notorious Johnny Silverhand to be the same person? At first glance, they seemed unrelated. In truth, they had much in common. Both wielded extraordinary power. He had split the Black Lake with a single sword. Both displayed remarkable intelligence. The Order of Merlin's second class proved that. They shared a mutual friend, Darman Alex Bilby. The connections piled up until Old Barty's confusion cleared and something terrible occurred to him. Why would Johnny Silverhand, who never showed his face, suddenly remove his mask? In the magical world, there were countless ways to bind people. Perhaps John felt he no longer needed to hide because Barty was already in his pocket? No, that wouldn't be secure enough. Barty might still resist. Then why? Chapter 323. Could it be Imperio? The cold clarity of the discovery spread like ice through old Barty. His hand crept toward the pocket where his wand lay. That man, Johnny Silverhand, was the second king. Did he really stand a chance? Battle-hardened and iron-willed, old Barty felt his heart pounding uncontrollably. Should he strike now or wait? The choice pinned him in place. Sweat soaked his temples, his palms were clammy. No one would ever have thought it was you, old Barty managed, staring hard at the face before him. John lowered his mask, each slight motion taut with menace. Old Barty's body coiled, his concentration absolute, his eyes bloodshot. Just as he braced himself for an attack, John said flatly, "This is a gesture of my sincerity, old Barty. I'm going to die." For a moment, old Barty thought he had misheard. He looked up at the young, pale face in disbelief. "What did you say?" "I'm going to die, old Barty." John spread his hands helplessly. It shouldn't be hard to tell. He unbuttoned his collar. Black veins ran half up his neck. Old Barty didn't know whether he felt relief or disappointment. Caught between hope and dread, his whole body loosened. A look of baffled shock settled on his lined face. "You're going to die?" He rubbed his eyes until the rims reddened. "Yes," John said with a grin. "That's why I took off my mask." Old Barty thought it over. It was the only explanation that made sense. He had gone through 1,000 scenarios and never imagined this one. He let his wand drop with a long, shaky sigh. You're still so young." "Young makes people wary, doesn't it?" John leaned back in his chair, unnervingly calm. "So you want to do something for the ministry in your last moments?" There was a hint of teasing in his voice. Old Barty, unexpectedly moved, missed the sarcasm. "How much time do you have left? If you'll allow it, I can erect a statue of you in the ministry." "You misunderstand." John rebuttoned his collar. Seeing old Barty's misplaced sentiment, he shook his head. "I'm not having a sudden burst of kindness." "Then what is this for?" Old Barty's patience returned. Facing a dying man, he was not going to be hurried. John's voice went low and steady. "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." "Against Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort." Old Barty's knuckles whitened. His fingernails bit into his palms, and he scarcely noticed. He stared at John, who remained utterly composed. "So I want you to lend me the Ministry of Magic for a time. My compensation, I'll renovate it for free." "Do you know what you're asking?" Old Barty's brow knit. "You want to take vengeance on the Dark Lord by borrowing the ministry?" He felt the man might be feverish and confused. Borrow the ministry? There had never been such a precedent in the history of the wizarding world. Lord Voldemort will want something in the ministry. He will come. John toyed with something in his fingers. A fervent light gleamed in his eyes. "This is a deal and an opportunity for you, Minister Crouch." He used the formal title, cutting through the familiar. Old Barty's expression flickered. He weighed possibilities, long and hard. His achievements had made him a respected minister, but if the ministry fell, everything he'd built would crumble. Looking at that young face, he imagined what the wizard could become if he lived long enough to mature into his talents. But his own memory, an O in potions at Hogwarts, told him John would not live long. He chastised himself for bargaining even with a dying man. Perhaps he was a cruel man. It reminded him uncomfortably of how he had once treated Barty Jr. "You'll need to offer sufficient leverage to convince me," old Barty said finally. "You know the Star Disciples are mine, and the security team is equipped with the Zed series," John said confidently. "These are powerful assets," old Barty admitted, "but this is Voldemort." "What if we add the Savior and Dumbledore?" John asked. Old Barty sank into thought. One man had once defeated Voldemort. Another was the man Voldemort feared most. John continued, "The Order of the Phoenix, an organization equal to, if not more formidable than, the Death Eaters." Old Barty's face shifted. After a long breath, he let out a heavy sigh. I choose to believe you, Johnny Silverhand. No, John Wick. John stood and took his hand. You won't regret it, Minister Crouch. Chapter 352, Exams and Beginnings. John returned on the day the OWL exams began. No one bothered to ask where he had been. If John Wick stayed put and stopped being mysterious, he wouldn't be John Wick. Officials from the ministry came to supervise. Griselda Marchbanks, who had once supervised Dumbledore's exams, was among them. The exams would run 2 weeks, theory in the mornings, practicals in the afternoons, and some special subjects like astronomy held at night. Tension threaded through Hogwarts. Many students crammed desperately. You don't look well, John, Daphne said, setting a glass of milk in front of him. John took a sip and chuckled faintly. You know, Daphne, he murmured so only she could hear. Remember my words. The worry in Daphne's eyes didn't ease. Malfoy sat nearby, muttering to himself and trying to block out distractions as he crammed through the long chapters of History of Magic. The theory exams were held in the Great Hall. The long house tables were gone, replaced by single desks and chairs. Invigilators sat at the staff table, where they could watch for cheating. Both 5th and 7th years were taking exams. 5th years went in first. John sat with Goyle in front of him and Malfoy at the far right. Goyle, just do your best, John said quietly to the anxious boy. Goyle blinked and realized John was beside him. But my brain isn't very good, he fretted. They say I'm like a dwarf troll. John patted his back. Don't worry about what others say. Trust what you've learned. If you hit a question you don't know, skip it and come back later. Goyle calmed under John's encouragement. When Professor McGonagall turned over the hourglass, the exam began. John scanned the paper, dipped his quill, and started writing. The first question asked for the incantation and wand movement for the levitation charm. From the moment he received the paper, John moved through it with scarcely a pause. His answers came neat and precise, like a printer running cleanly. Goyle stalled for a while, but then looked relieved. He had followed John's advice and skipped the tricky bits first. Where 2 hours were allotted, John finished in half an hour. He set down his quill and let his gaze go unfocused. A familiar interface, his training panel, seemed to hover before his thoughts. Under normal progress, he still needed close to a year to reach level 6 magic, but the Oak Mage had doubled his absorption rate. Even so, level 6 would still take time. Professor McGonagall patrolled the hall and could not help noticing John's calm among the scribbling students. She stepped to his desk and glanced at his parchment, surprise creasing her features. Hermione, still writing furiously a few desks away, caught the look and felt a sting of helplessness. Everyone knew Hermione Granger wanted to outdo John. Now she felt the arrogance of that desire collapse into something like despair. Still, she forced herself to push down the feeling and press on. 2 hours sped by. Malfoy floated out of the Great Hall, muttering about when he'd learned the hiccup charm. Daphne rubbed her wrist and fretted, I think I missed a letter in the Happy Charm section. After lunch came the practicals. Students were called alphabetically into a small room beside the Great Hall. John was near the end of the list. He watched Malfoy leave with his usual swagger. Practicals were easier for him than tedious theory. When John entered, Griselda Marchbanks happened to be free and looked delighted to see him. The last time we met was at the ministry, she said in her old, quavering voice. Hello, John Wick. Professor Marchbanks, John replied with a smile. On her desk were a few cups, some flowers, and a batch of mice. Take this egg cup and make it do a few somersaults for me, she said. Chapter 324. John glanced toward the table, and the cup flew into his hand on its own. He idly drew his wand. As Marchbanks watched, astonished, the egg cup flipped over. Perfect, Marchbanks's aged voice boomed. Now make the cup float, and it would be even better if flowers could appear and bloom inside. No sooner had she spoken than John waved his wand. 3 flowers dropped into 3 egg cups and unfurled within them. Marchbanks clapped without restraint. An idea struck her. For extra credit, make them change further. John raised an eyebrow. Every mouse on the table rose into the air, shifting to green, blue, red, and yellow. Flowers tumbled into cups, their leaves stretching like arms before the blooms opened in every hue. Perfect levitation charm, color-changing charm, and growth charm, he said. Applause came from more than Marchbanks this time. John bowed slightly, a calm smile never leaving his face. He snapped his fingers. The mice reverted to their natural colors and darted back into their cages with high-pitched squeaks. The next day focused on transfiguration. John finished the morning theory in half an hour as usual. In the practical, he once again left the examiner speechless. A weasel transfigured into a vase, flowers produced from it, and then, with another precise flick, the vase vanished. Malfoy's smugness had dimmed. Transfiguration had always been his weak point, while Daphne emerged with a happy smile. She had done very well. Herbology was next. As a potion master, John would have been embarrassed to fail at basic plant work. While others fumbled with repotting, harvesting, and extracting, John completed everything smoothly. The examiner, a little stunned, began to suspect this student had no weaknesses. The fourth day brought defense against the dark arts. Harry entered brimming with confidence. His practical went so well he even produced a Patronus for extra credit, earning applause. When John took his turn, he remained composed and approached a different examiner. Professor Tofty, who had just examined Harry Potter, watched John with keen interest. Curiosity sharpened into a challenge. When a silver albatross appeared at John's command, Tofty applauded again. "Excellent, you surprise me, Wick." John grinned. "Want to be even more surprised?" Tofty's eyes widened. "Do you have other advanced spells?" John held up his wand. White light gathered at the tip before he hurled it forward. The light, crackling and fragmented, became lightning that laced across the air. "A remarkable variant of the shattering spell," Tofty cried, his neck reddening with excitement. John tapped his wand on the desk. A crisp, propagating note radiated outward and destroyed nearby objects. Another variant. Tofty had never seen such a shattering charm. The fragments knit themselves back together, and John waved again toward a table. Invisible blades sliced cleanly through the wood. Tofty tried to repair the table with a charm, but found the cut irreparable. His expression shifted from excitement to cautious awe. "This spell? It's my own creation," John said simply. Tofty's admiration was uncontained. This was genius. While others were still learning, John had already begun inventing magic. "Excellent. I can guarantee it," Tofty said, giving a thumbs up. John inclined his head and left the room. Chapter 353, Excellence and Umbrage. Bitten by a Dog. Friday brought ancient runes. Having chosen 12 electives, John faced an exam every day. Professor Bathsheba Babbling was flattered to see him walk in. When she looked over his translations, she went pale. The level of detail on his answers could have served as a textbook. As a professor, she felt suddenly embarrassed and, for a moment, deferential. There were no exams on Saturday or Sunday, but rest was not an option. Monday was potions. The morning theory stumped most of the room. Even Malfoy's usually immaculate hair was disheveled. Some questions edged into obscure territory, like the precise effects of Polyjuice potion. John took a little longer than usual, 31 minutes. Snape kept his distance. The blood magic potion John had developed made the man particularly wary. If these exams could shake John Wick, then his reputation as a potion master would be in question, so Snape watched closely. In the afternoon, John brewed the required potion fastest of all. Tuesday's Care of Magical Creatures practical was easy for him. Finding a flobberworm, dealing with a bowtruckle, and feeding and cleaning fire crabs were routine. Wednesday held astronomy by night, with divination in the afternoon. When John entered the divination room, everyone stared. "That's him, isn't it? The boy with the inner eye." "Yes, he made predictions last term." Trelawney may be overrated, but her student is something else. A chief examiner took a seat opposite John and planted a crystal ball between them. The mist inside began to swirl. The examiner, an old man with a growth on his nose, grew excited. He read talent in the movement. John watched the fog coalesce, and the vision that came made him still. Hogwarts plunged into sorrow. He was silent for a long moment. "There will be a funeral," he said finally. The chief examiner pressed for more, but John stared at him with steady eyes. Some things, knowing too much, isn't good. At 11 that night, the astronomy tower exam began. The sky was perfect, no clouds, no wind, and moonlight washed the grounds in a pale glow. They set up telescopes and recorded precise positions of stars and planets. Malfoy rubbed his hands with confidence. Neville looked sure of himself, too. Members of the Constellation Society had the stars as their home turf. John felt the starlight like nourishment. He could have worked without a telescope. He filled in his charts quickly, finishing a parchment while others still observed. When he completed the last graph, he lingered at the tower, gazing over the grounds. Lights glimmered in Hagrid's hut, and clusters of figures whispered near the castle gates. The humping willow stood mostly still, then shuddered, as if something had passed through the concealed passage beneath, though no one was visible. Hagrid's dog Tom and Fang bounded out. Tom nosed the grass, then barked in one direction, sharply alert. John followed his gaze. Someone moved from the castle toward Hagrid's, Dolores Umbridge. She strode imperiously to Hagrid's door, face set in the most unpleasant smile. Hagrid's expression crumpled from disbelief to dismay. He tried to plead, but Umbridge was relentless. Tension mounted until Tom ran forward and bit her on the calf. Umbridge fell backward, hitting her head on a stone. Blood blossomed at the wound. Her scream, a high, pig-like shriek, cut through the night and silenced the students in the tower. Professor McGonagall rushed over, staring at the chaotic scene. Tom darted into Hagrid's hut to hide. Umbridge, struggling to speak, suddenly foamed at the mouth. Alarmed, McGonagall bundled her up and hurried her toward the hospital wing. Hagrid was beside himself. Tom had caused trouble. He bolted into his hut and returned carrying a small box, then hurried toward the main gate. With 20 minutes left on the exam, John felt dozens of eyes on him. He turned to see Malfoy hesitating, as if unsure whether to speak, but for now the Slytherin continued with his chart. Who would have thought Umbridge would be bitten by a dog and incapacitated by it? When the exam ended, a crowd gathered around John, buzzing with questions. "Is Tom okay?" Malfoy asked. Chapter 325, John thought for a moment and said, "It should be fine." Malfoy found the answer perfunctory and asked, "What about Umbridge?" "It shouldn't be anything serious either." Malfoy fell silent. Only the three little ones remembered the last person who had been bitten. They suddenly brightened at the thought of seeing Umbridge turned into a dog. Daphne asked, puzzled, "Why did Professor Hagrid take Tom away?" "He probably thought Tom would be punished." John shrugged. After the Buckbeak incident, Hagrid feared similar consequences for Tom. He didn't realize punishment often depended on who was doing the punishing. Besides, with an entire Slytherin house quietly backing John, no one was likely to bother a small, harmless dog. After the astronomy exam, the only compulsory test left was history of magic. John still had to sit the Muggle studies and arithmancy electives. Once the arithmancy exam was done, the history of magic exam would be the final one the next day. Night had fallen. John stood in the corridor. It was curfew. Madame Norris trotted up with her usual elegant gait and rubbed against John's trousers. He bent, picked up the cat, who had somehow grown a little larger, and petted her. "You're here. Where's Filch?" Filch wasn't to be seen. John took a brush from his bag and stroked Madame Norris's fur. She narrowed her eyes and purred, clearly enjoying it. Umbridge had been admitted to the hospital wing after being bitten. Even Madame Pomfrey had to ask Professor McGonagall what had done it. The wound did not look like ordinary dog teeth. It left flesh nearly torn away, as if a large carnivore had attacked. Worse, the leg wouldn't stop bleeding. Bandages soaked through quickly. The hospital wing was in chaos, running potion after potion. Umbridge seemed petrified, fully conscious but unable to move. McGonagall had done everything she could, but she didn't understand what had happened. They had managed to keep Umbridge alive, but how long the immobility would last depended on finding an antidote. Madame Pomfrey had no ready solution, only a rough idea that the condition resembled basilisk petrification. Mandrakes could help, but those took time to mature. It was something to be glad of, if only exams weren't hanging over everyone. John made a little ball of the fur he'd brushed off Madame Norris, tossed it to the cat, and slipped out of the castle. Stepping onto the grass, he felt sweat bead on his forehead. He stopped and looked up. The humping willow swayed in the night, and the passage beneath it looked like an entrance to another world. John walked to it. The tree stilled as he passed, and he moved down the hidden tunnel. He reached the shrieking shack. The shack was dim and musty. The grotesque, tear-stained wallpaper still hinted at its former werewolf occupant. John moved through to the room where he'd once found the boggart. A gap remained where the cabinet had been moved. He stood outside it. Turning toward another room, he saw the dust layer on the floor was thinner. Someone had been here. Moonlight slanted through a door, and the shadow on the floor confirmed there was a person inside. He paused, not pushing the door open. "Tell me, what should I do?" He murmured into the dark. Clouds slid over the moon. The shadow vanished. John stared at the crack beneath the door. A slip of paper eased out from underneath. He picked it up and read, "Live to die." He glanced at the handwriting, then at the door, but still did not push it open. Instead, he went downstairs. His gaze snagged on a small wooden box. He picked it up and felt a presence behind him, a vague, blurred figure, its face indistinct. He left the shrieking shack with the box in hand. Back at the Humping Willow, he pried up the raised stone under the passage. Hidden beneath was a thumb-sized hydro flask filled with a blood-red liquid that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The Constellation Society's starlight was as clear as the night outside. Since its founding, the great alchemical machine beneath the dome had not ceased its work. Starlight fell onto the round table below. The table split open, revealing the arsenal and the always boiling cauldron. The smoke rose and fell like breathing. John descended to the cauldron. The liquid churned, missing one final ingredient. He sliced his wrist and let blood drip into the pot. The boiling liquid cooled instantly. He opened his other hand and felt a surge of magic flow into him. The liquid in the cauldron split into two, forming twin red dragons that coiled and spun. He drew his wand. Like an extractor, it pulled the rising white smoke in. The wand took on an ethereal quality. John's right hand gleamed silver. He raised the wand high, and the stars on the dome flared. Starlight converged into a brilliant beam that struck the room. Magic crystals embedded around the dome, which had been absorbing ambient magic, released their built-up power. The surge was far greater than before. Fine cracks appeared along the now ethereal wand. Immense force slammed into John, his face flushed, and his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed back the blood. The magical pressure almost swallowed him. He clenched the wand and growled, "Stars align." The wand bent under the strain like a sapling in a storm. Every inch of movement was a struggle. The red dragons inside the cauldron began to break apart. John forced his breath and will, drawing the column of light toward the cauldron. The wand strained, barely holding the flow of power. When the magic finally met the pot, the red dragons shuddered and roared, as if coming fully alive. Exhausted, John let go. The wand flew from his hand and crashed into the arsenal wall. He forced himself upright. In his hands lay a crown, condensed in the starlight, a flashing circlet of radiance like a small rainbow. He studied it, then set it on his head. Externally, nothing seemed to change, but inwardly, he felt he had gained something, a clarity that felt like wisdom. It was the kind of knowledge earned by letting go of the desperate chase for it. Timing his next move perfectly, his silver-covered finger poked at the side of one red dragon. It burst like a balloon. From his pocket, he took a small bottle and sprinkled a red powder into the agitated liquid. The cauldron calmed. "And finally, a little mysterious substance from a magic user," he intoned softly. That mysterious substance was called emotion. Between the components in the pot, the point of condensation was tinier than a speck of dust, but it shimmered with intent. Chapter 326. As the liquid fell into the cauldron, the magically boiling fluid evaporated instantly. The brilliant column of magic winked out. Without the stabilizing pressure, the cauldron broke free and flew away. When it landed, a huge plume of thick white vapor billowed out, swallowing the Constellation Society in a cool, damp mist rather than scalding steam. John couldn't see through it at first. He pushed into the fog until he could make out the cauldron, still more or less intact. Crack. A crisp, splitting sound came from the metal. John watched as the cauldron split cleanly in two and toppled. When the halves hit the ground, both shattered into countless fragments. "Well, it's not whole anymore," he muttered and stepped forward with a strange blend of hope and fear. His heart pounded. The ache in his chest eased slightly as the distance closed. Carefully, like a prospector sifting through a dangerous mine, he picked up piece after piece. At last, he found one. Triangular, a flash of crimson peeking out from beneath dust and ash. As the mist thinned and starlight filtered through, the crimson became clear and translucent. John lifted it. Only when his fingers closed around the fragment did the moment feel real. It worked, he laughed aloud, breathless. He staggered to his feet, dust and debris clinging to him. The armory was a ruin. He held the fragment up and gave a bitter, grateful smile. "Thank goodness for magic," he said. He removed the diadem from his head. It dissolved into motes of starlight, vanishing into his palm. After a moment's search, he found his wand, a red oak rod embedded in the wall. It took effort to pull it free. If the wand had been splintered, he would have had to find another. He stepped out of the armory to find the mist lingering throughout the Constellation Society. "Fine," he said, waving his wand. The fog rose toward the dome like a weather pattern. The stars above dimmed behind a veil of cloud. When the last of the vapor floated away, John felt less exhausted. Maybe it was relief, or the lightness of triumph. He considered a hot bath in the prefect's bathroom. He was a mess. He went and soaked for a long time. Then he looked down. His skin was traced in a dense web of black vessels. He glanced up to the mirror and saw the dark veins had crept from his neck across his cheeks. He rubbed his forehead. His throat itched. He began to cough, and black blood sputtered onto the floor. The dark markings on his pale face looked worse, terrifying even. After he'd cleaned himself as best he could, he heard a movement by the pool and turned. Myrtle floated there, eyes wide. "John," she said. Myrtle, who normally relished male attention, stared at him blankly and then blurted, "Are you going to die? If you die, can you become a ghost?" John could only stare. Not a comforting word, just a curse. He was left speechless. When the moment ended, life resumed its odd routines. There was a subject at Hogwarts that both wizards and muggles studied, a class that everyone agreed was painful: history of magic. Malfoy knew the feeling well. He still couldn't fathom why anyone would make them memorize the goblin rebellions of the 18th century. But under exam conditions, everyone was equal. With Professor Marchbanks supervising, they returned to the Great Hall. "John, did you not sleep well last night?" Malfoy teased, eyeing John's complexion. "Worried you won't remember? I can sympathize." "And aren't you boiling with that color up so high?" John shot back. Malfoy tried to recall the exact origins of the 18th century goblin rebellions, only to realize with a sinking feeling that he couldn't. "It's over," he wailed in despair. John laughed and then began to cough. The cough grew worse. Malfoy frowned, about to ask more, when the summons came for students to enter the examination hall. Chapter 355, Examination Hall, Emergency and Dream. Today was the last exam day. The test was scheduled for the afternoon. Once this one was over, freedom awaited them. Results would arrive by owl in July. John took his usual seat in the Great Hall and stared at the back of Goyle's head. Marchbanks flipped the hourglass and the exam began. Quills whispered across parchment like distant rain. Everyone wanted to finish quickly and sleep. The summer heat made minds sluggish and questions felt dizzying. Sweat ran down brows. John wasn't racing through the paper. He watched the others, Goyle scratching his head with no answers, Malfoy running his fingers through his hair as if words might fall out, Hermione measuring spacing between lines with a ruler, Harry distracted by the big bumblebees thudding against the glass outside, Ron nonchalant and resigned, trusting to luck. On Ron's face, John could read a mixture of confidence, false hope, and guilt. Daphne dipped the quill John had given her and focused intently. As studious students, Hermione and Daphne only paused occasionally to think. The rest racked their brains and eventually began to guess. John surveyed them all, then started to write. His hand moved slower than usual. After a few lines, he would stop and cough, a soft sound that carried in the hush of the hall. Marchbanks glanced at him. She had admired the boy's poise under pressure before. Perhaps it's just a little flu, she thought. His coughing didn't disturb anyone enough for her to intervene. An hour passed. John set his quill down and reviewed his answers. Did wand legislation cause better control of the 18th century goblin rebellions, or was it a result of it? How was the International Statute of Secrecy breached in 1749, and what measures followed to prevent similar incidents? The parchment beneath his hand was a neat, elegant script, more like a poem than an exam answer. Satisfied, he placed the pen aside and cleared his mind. The scratch of quills was almost soothing. For some, it would have been a test of willpower. John closed his eyes, breathed, and raised his hand. Every examiner's gaze turned to him. Professor Tofty, sitting closest, leaned forward. "Wick, what's wrong?" he called in a clear voice. The hall fell quiet. John answered honestly, "I'm feeling unwell." "If it's just a bit, you'd best bear with it," Tofty said. "This exam is nearly over." John surprised him by standing. "I think I need to go to the hospital wing, Professor." Tofty's face soured. He'd expected the boy to sit back down. All right. Just don't be trying to find a hidden history of magic book in the hospital wing. A student did that once," he grumbled, not entirely convinced but allowing it. Chapter 327. John looked at him and chuckled, a smile on his face. "You can rest assured about that." Tofty was moving to collect the parchment. His steps were heavy, then he froze. His grumpy face went slack with horror. "Professor, someone get him to the hospital wing," he cried. John's face had dark veins spreading across it, and black blood seeped from his eyes and mouth. It was like a scene from a nightmare. John managed a crooked smile. "If we're quick." The ink from Daphne's quill dripped onto the parchment. She made no move to react. Malfoy stared blankly, frozen. The great hall fell deathly quiet, except for the hurried footsteps of Tofty and a few other examiners carrying John away. "Sit down and continue the exam," Marchbanks barked, her voice steady from years of experience. But after what they had seen, more than half the students were distracted. Daphne tried several times to pick up her dropped quill and failed. Panic tightened her chest. A chair scraped loudly. Malfoy had pushed his back and darted after them. Almost all the Slytherins followed. "Sit down," Daphne shouted. She forced herself to calm her breathing and reminded them of the agreement. "Continue the exam. John is fine. This is nothing to him." The Slytherins remembered John's past deeds and reluctantly sat. Malfoy alone ignored them. Marchbanks collected the papers with a flourish. When she looked at John's exam, she couldn't help but admire it like a work of art. Malfoy's was only half finished. Harry's mind was a tangle. He was trying to answer the 10th question, remembering that the first Confederation meeting had been held in France when he heard the commotion about John being sent to the hospital wing. The image of John's black-veined face and the black blood kept replaying in his head. He wanted to tell himself, "John Wick, how could anything happen to him?" But the vision would not be banished. He forced himself to focus, to answer, and the rustle of papers drifted through the hall. The hourglass kept draining. Harry watched the grains fall and, almost without meaning to, counted them. Slowly the falling sand blurred and shifted. The glass formed a dim, cool corridor, the Department of Mysteries. Harry found himself walking there, his steps steady and urgent. He moved faster, sometimes breaking into a jog. The black door opened as it had before, and he stood in the circular room with many doors. Without hesitation, he crossed the stone floor and pushed through the second door. Patches of light shimmered like the Pensieve in Snape's office. A strange beeping sounded, but he paid it no mind. Time was slipping. He passed through the third door into a cavern of shelves and glass spheres, like a great echoing cathedral. He walked between the aisles until he reached the 97th row. He turned left and went deeper. At the end of that aisle, something writhed on the floor, a dim shape he couldn't fully make out. As if guided by someone else, Harry's voice emerged, cold and high-pitched, almost not his own. "Go get it for me, quickly. Take it down. I can't touch it, but you can." He commanded the dark shape. When it didn't move, he drew his wand and, pale hands steady, uttered a curse without mercy. "Crucio!" The thing screamed and contorted in agony. "Lord Voldemort is waiting." The man on the floor trembled, shoulders shaking. When he lifted his head, it was a face Harry knew too well, Sirius. Why was Sirius there? The question barely formed before Sirius screamed again. The scene swallowed up Harry's confusion and left only terror. Sirius's face was streaked with blood, distorted with pain, yet his eyes were fierce. "Unless you kill me," he said, refusing to back down, "I will." The voice that answered him was cold, void of warmth. "You first need to take it down, Black. Do you think this is the limit? We have all the time in the world. No one will come." "No, Sirius," Harry tried to scream. He fell to the cold stone and jolted awake, his scar burning with white-hot pain. He was still shouting when heads turned toward him in the great hall. Hermione and Ron looked terrified. Marchbanks gasped and hurried to his side. "Oh my goodness," she murmured, helping the struggling Harry out of the hall. What's wrong today? One after another. Something's happening. Harry could barely form sentences. I just fell asleep and had a nightmare, he said, incoherent. Marchbank's face tightened. Everyone feels exam pressure, and with John Wick's condition, she said gently. Perhaps you'd do better to calm down outside. No, Professor. I've answered everything I can. Harry tried to steady himself. He needed help. He had to warn someone about Sirius. Marchbanks took his test paper and suggested he lie down for a bit. Harry nodded, eyes flicking toward the staircase. Thank you, Professor, he said before bolting up the marble steps. He raced to McGonagall's office and knocked hard, but there was no answer. Dumbledore wasn't at school. Hagrid was absent. McGonagall was nowhere to be found either. He felt like a small, panic-stricken thing searching a vast, empty house. Harry, Ron's voice called, and Ron came running, out of breath. Hermione was nowhere in sight. What's wrong? Are you sick? Ron panted. Come with me. Where's Hermione? Harry grabbed Ron and pulled him toward an empty classroom. She went to the hospital wing right after the exam. John's there, Ron said, still shaken by what he'd seen. You should have seen him. I know, Harry said, but Sirius has been captured by Voldemort. He's being tortured. What? How could you? I saw it when I fell asleep, Harry said, urgency lacing his words. Hermione soon appeared, eyes wide and pale. John is sick, she repeated, voice trembling. But where would Sirius be? How was he captured? I don't know how, Harry said, but I know where. A room in the Department of Mysteries. Rows of shelves filled with small glass spheres. At the end of the 97th row. They're torturing him to get something from there. They say they'll kill him in the end. A helplessness settled over Harry. The people he might have relied on were absent, and he felt dangerously alone. Chapter 3328. How do we get there? Harry demanded. Get where? Ron stammered. To the Department of Mysteries, Harry exclaimed. Only there can we save Sirius. Harry. Hermione took a deep breath. She was terrified. How could Voldemort get you into the Ministry without being noticed? How should I know? Harry snapped, losing control. The problem is how we get there. Hermione tried to make him see the obvious. The Ministry was full of employees. It was theoretically impossible. I don't know, maybe the invisibility cloak or flu or something, Harry said loudly. Anyway, the Department of Mysteries is always empty. You've never been there, Harry, Hermione corrected. To her it sounded like a nightmare, not a vision. But Harry didn't think so. He'd once saved Mr. Weasley after a dream, so how could this be only a dream? Even Ron thought it sounded plausible. Hermione's eyes were fixed toward the hospital wing. Harry stepped so he blocked her view. Sirius is going to die, Hermione. She knew how furious he got when distracted or skeptical of his instincts. But she was frightened herself. Her friend lay in that bed. She snapped. I'm not criticizing you, Harry, but aren't you being a little reckless? Harry had been like this before. He always felt he had to be the one to save people. In their third year, he'd wanted revenge against Sirius. You don't understand? Harry yelled. I didn't have a nightmare. I didn't dream at all. Why do you think I learned occlumency? Why do you think Dumbledore warned me not to look? It's because these things are dangerous, Hermione said. If they're getting in, that's worse than a dream. It could be a trick. Maybe Voldemort is trying to lure you. It's real, Hermione. Sirius walked straight into a trap. I saw it. No one else knows, Harry added, which means only we can save him. If you won't come, stay here. Wait for John if you want. But I'm going. He's my godfather. You didn't complain about my impulsiveness when I saved you by the lake, Hermione fired back. At the hospital wing entrance, some Slytherin students stirred. A figure had appeared, John, spitting black blood. Hermione's heart dropped. Hearing Harry's last words, she snapped, What about John? How many times has he saved you? Ron fell silent under her fury. Compared to Harry's vision, John really was in the bed, bleeding. The atmosphere tightened. Harry turned away, furious that Hermione still thought it might be a dream. Hermione, with a close friend seriously ill, wasn't going to abandon him because of some supposed vision. And Dumbledore had insisted Harry learn occlumency. He hadn't made progress. Then the door to an empty classroom opened. Ginny and Luna came in. They'd been to visit John after hearing he was unwell. Hearing the argument, they'd come to check. Hello, Ginny said hesitantly. We heard Harry shouting. What's going on? None of your business, Harry said sharply. He was on edge. Ginny's face turned cold. No need for that tone. I was only asking if we could help. You can't, Harry replied curtly. Luna, calm and distant as ever, said, Your tone is rude. Harry didn't want to argue with Luna. She was odd but harmless. Luna, how is John? Hermione pressed. Luna, still looking slightly elsewhere, said, He's all right. He said he was fine and even winked at me. See? Harry said, indignant. Hermione finally relaxed a little. Ginny looked like she wanted to say more but held back. She'd seen Madame Pomfrey's reddened eyes and Professor Snape acting agitated, shooing students away. Hermione knew she'd been harsh with Harry out of worry, so she softened. Harry, we need to verify the dream. What if it's Voldemort trying to trick you? Harry wanted to shout more, but Hermione's glare calmed him. How do we check? Use the flue, Luna suggested, her voice almost singing. Umbridge's fireplace is the closest, and she's supposed to be hospitalized. No one will check that office. Without further delay, they headed to Umbridge's office. The door wasn't locked. They entered, dumped flue powder into the fire, and tried Grimmauld Place first. Harry called, expecting Sirius. Creature answered. Sirius wasn't there. Harry went pale. Everything felt like it was sliding back toward a terrible inevitability. Then Umbridge herself appeared, furious, eyes blazing. No one had expected that Madame Pomfrey had found a leftover antidote and cured Umbridge after she'd been bitten by a dog. Once cured, Umbridge's first thought was vengeance, especially against any dog or giant she blamed. She stared at the five of them and hissed, Where is Rubeus Hagrid? Harry's heart sank. He'd been caught red-handed. What are you doing in my office? Umbridge demanded, her face twitching from pain or outrage. I just wanted my firebolt back, Harry said hoarsely. Lies, Umbridge snapped. She pointed her wand at them. I heard you talking to someone. You were talking to that giant, she shrieked, losing every trace of her fake smile. No, we weren't, Harry protested, but Umbridge would not be placated. She marched forward, grabbed Harry by his collar, and flung him onto her desk. Harry felt fury rise and reflexively reached for his wand, but Umbridge's eyes were quicker. She snatched it from him and tossed it aside. Don't try to lie, she said. Who you talk to is none of your business, Harry roared. Very well. Umbridge adopted that sickly sweet tone she used when she thought it gave her power. I gave you a chance, Mr. Potter. I have no choice but to force the truth out of you. Her wand swept, and in a blink, Ginny's wand flew from her hand and landed in Umbridge's. One by one, the others' wands were disarmed as well. So you think you can attack me? Umbridge laughed that hateful laugh. Now all of you are going to be expelled. Her gaze lingered on the Weasleys. There won't be a single Weasley left at this school. Ginny glared, furious and helpless. Ron was stunned, but the presence of an adult witch overpowered them. Umbridge pointed her wand at a piece of parchment and, with a small incantation, the quill on her desk began to write unaided. Professor Snape, please come to the office. I have Potter, the quill wrote. The parchment folded itself into a paper airplane and sailed away. We have plenty of time to talk, Umbridge said, smugly. Harry's mind raced. Snape. He'd forgotten there were still members of the Order around who might be foul or not. When Professor Snape entered, his face was grim. Harry even thought he saw a flash of sorrow in it. If you have nothing to say, Snape's voice was cold, I don't have time to bother with Potter. Yet Snape came forward anyway. I'll need another bottle of Veritaserum as soon as possible, Professor Snape, Umbridge insisted, forcing a smile. You took my last bottle to interrogate, Snape said, sweeping his gaze over them. 3 drops, and someone will tell you everything. Harry's eyes widened as he met Snape's cold stare, silently begging him not to read his thoughts. You can brew more, can't you? Umbridge demanded. It takes a moon cycle, Snape said impatiently. You'll have to wait. I still have the right to grade you, Umbridge blurted, resorting to threats when she saw she couldn't get what she wanted. Snape's jaw tightened and he turned to leave, walking briskly. Harry blurted, He's got Padfoot. Padfoot's in that place where he hides things. Snape's steps faltered for a heartbeat. Then he hurried away, suddenly more urgent. Padfoot? Umbridge muttered to herself, excitement and satisfaction warping her features. You forced my hand. Her expression grew darker. If Veritaserum isn't available, perhaps a little extra persuasion. The Cruciatus will bring the truth. No, wait, Harry, We can't tell her that, Hermione cried, panicked. Harry stared at her, startled that she'd understood the danger. Ron and the others looked as though they couldn't believe what was being suggested. Umbridge's wand flicked once. Ron slumped to the floor, stunned and helpless. Hagrid! Hagrid wants us to go to the Forbidden Forest, Harry heard himself say, as the pressure mounted. He's prepared something for Dumbledore there. Something? Umbridge's surprise quickly shifted to delight. Chapter 329. She had always wanted to win favor with Dumbledore. If she could prove he was planning something that threatened the Ministry of Magic, the recognition would be enormous. Weapon, Hermione sobbed, burying her face in her hands. But Ron saw the corner of her mouth twitch into a smile. Umbridge, already eager for a triumph, sneered, "Take me to see this weapon." Hermione's body trembled, and Umbridge looked pleased. She flicked her wand. Ropes flew out and bound Ron and the others. "You and I and Potter will go see it," Umbridge warned. "Don't try anything." Harry didn't know what Hermione was up to, but he understood they had to follow her lead for now. The three were escorted out of the office. Umbridge's expression flickered with impatience. Occasionally, she emitted a high, yelping sound that made the hairs on the back of Harry's neck rise. Hermione and Harry walked in front, exchanging anxious glances, hoping a professor might appear. No one did. Their wands had been taken. They were helpless against Umbridge. They left the castle and reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest. "Where exactly is it?" Umbridge demanded sharply. Hermione feigned timidity. "In the Forbidden Forest. That weapon is terribly powerful." Umbridge, half convinced and wholly delighted at the chance to disgrace Dumbledore, pressed on. They walked deeper and deeper until Hermione's voice grew strained. She had been loudly insisting they could use the centaurs to deal with Umbridge, but for some reason none appeared. Panic showed on Hermione's face. "What trick are you trying to pull?" Umbridge snapped and pointed her wand at them. "Where is it? Where exactly?" Sweat beaded on Hermione's forehead. She stammered, It's... Caw! A white shadow descended from above. Umbridge's hand holding her wand began to bleed. The wand slipped from her fingers. Roar! The sound of something huge made them freeze. Umbridge's shriek strangled into a croak. Harry felt wind rush past his head and cautiously turned. A massive tail, long and thick like a peony in bloom, swished. A towering, cat-like creature blinked at them, enormous and still. Hermione went rigid. She forgot to breathe. A white figure with wings flapped down and settled squarely on the giant cat's head. Even the giant cat did not dare move. Hermione's eyes widened. "Basil?" she whispered. The winged creature, Basil, tilted its head and stared back. "Basil, save us!" Hermione cried. Umbridge snatched up her fallen wand and shrieked, "Move, you ugly beast!" She fired a rope spell to bind the giant cat, but the rope snapped mid-flight. Before she could react, a black, long-eared owl swooped in. Its beak pierced her wrist, its talons dug into her shoulder, and it lifted her into the air. Umbridge cursed as she was carried away, receding into the trees until she was gone. "Sirius!" Harry roared and ran after them. Hermione glanced back at Basil, still perched on the cat's head, then followed. At the forest's edge, Ron and the others burst out of the castle, having somehow freed themselves. "How did you get loose?" Hermione asked, breathless. Ron held up their wands. "Basil, it flew into the office and cut the ropes. What do we do now?" Ginny asked. "Of course we go after Sirius," Harry said. "But how do we get there?" Ron asked. They had no brooms for a quick chase. "We can fly," a faint voice said. It was Luna. "Yes, but we don't have enough brooms," Ron snapped. "You don't always need brooms," Luna replied calmly. "You don't have to grow wings either." "Then what? Ride a crumple-horned snorkack?" Ron scoffed. "They don't know the way unless they've been there," Luna said evenly. "Remember what Hagrid said? They can find the place their riders want to reach." Harry turned and saw, between two trees, two thestrals standing quietly. The pale-eyed creatures stared back as if understanding perfectly. Chapter 358, Star and Dimness. Snape returned to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey, eyes red, hurried to meet him. "Can we contact his family?" she asked. "That poison is lethal. There's no antidote," she said between wipes of her sleeve. Snape asked quietly, "May I speak with him?" "Mind the time," Madame Pomfrey replied, putting on her professional composure. "He needs rest." The ward was oddly still, except for a rough, gasping cough. John Wick's face was distorted, black veins marred his cheeks, and every cough shook his body as if he might cough out his lungs. Snape felt suddenly speechless and bewildered. For months he had warned Dumbledore about John, comparing him, in his private judgments, to someone like Voldemort, brilliant, charismatic, influential. John had transformed Slytherin, brought new energy and pride, even earning grudging respect from the likes of Malfoy and Greengrass. Snape had watched with conflicted fascination and rising unease. He had kept his distance, wary, convinced he could not risk being wrong. Now, standing before his dying student, Snape's certainties collapsed into something uglier and more personal. John saw him enter. His eyes were hollow and luminous with the dread of someone facing the end. Snape's face tightened. He forced himself to speak, and the words that came out were stripped of the old complexity. "Hello, Mr. Wick." "Professor." The single word cost John everything. It was almost a whisper. For a long moment, the two men only listened to his ragged breathing. Snape said, "The poison in your system was administered deliberately. Perhaps St. Mungo's could help." John laughed once, a sound that turned immediately into a cough. Black blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He shook his head slowly. "You're a potion master, Professor. You know as well as I do. St. Mungo's can't fix this." He stared at the ceiling with a calm Snape had not expected. "Professor McGonagall is a good woman. She will be very disappointed." Knowing more made the situation only bleaker. The poison was eating away at his organs. There was no remedy, nothing to stop the inevitable. Snape felt a tide of conflicting emotions. Irritation that someone he had feared might rise to power was dying, sorrow at the waste of a brilliant life, and a sharp, unexpected guilt. He had assumed relief would come when a potential threat fell, but instead he found only remorse. This had not been merely a possible enemy. This had been his student, Slytherin's brightest talent, and in a way, his responsibility. As dean, he had failed to protect, to guide, to teach. His initial coldness, his growing wariness and detachment, all of it had pushed John farther from him, maybe even toward the choices that led here. Snape stood by the bedside, the ward's pale light cutting across a face he had judged and misunderstood, and felt how small any judgment now seemed against the fact of a life slipping away. "I'm sorry." The words came from a mouth that usually dripped with sarcasm and scorn. They sounded almost foreign on Severus Snape. "I'm sorry, Wick," he said, voice low and unfamiliar. "As your head of house, I failed to protect you." He hesitated, eyes searching the room as if unsure how to face the Wick family. "I will notify your parents." "No need." John shook his head, a small, weary smile at the edges of his lips. "Let it be. Holding on only drags others into the pain." Snape's expression softened. He was taken aback by John's calm. Unlike a man who feared death above all else, John received it with a strange, quiet resolve. "Wick, you still have until sunset." It was the only concession the dean could make. "Professor, let the Constellation Society handle me," John said softly. Snape's departing steps faltered. He could have, by force of mind, read every thought that lay behind those words. He let the impulse die. There are lines even a potions master will not cross for a student he respects. "Very well." The hospital wing door opened then, and Professor McGonagall hurried in with St. Mungo's attending physician, Hippocrates Smethwick. The healer's mouth tightened at the sight of John. When he laid a hand to John's wrist, he recoiled slightly. The hand was withered, shriveled as if embalmed. Even the lightest touch could cause trouble. Smethwick examined him longer and longer, his face paling until he finally shook his head at McGonagall. "I'm sorry," he said bluntly. "He has reached his end." Professor McGonagall stepped back in disbelief. "Please, look again," she begged, though she knew healing was not her field. Smethwick's voice was clinical and final. "It's a toxin I've never seen, dozens of poisons combined. There's nothing left to counteract them. Sunset will be his last." McGonagall's hands went to her robes as if to brace herself. She looked toward Snape. He met her gaze and nodded once. If even the potion master could offer no remedy, then hope was gone. She left the hospital wing with heavy steps, unable to face the rest of the school. Outside, fewer people lingered than usual. One figure sat propped against the stone, tie loosened, hair bleached pale against the pale wall. Draco Malfoy, eyes fixed on his boots. Daphne Greengrass leaned against the wall nearby, supported by friends. News of John's condition had spread like fog. The knot of students grew as McGonagall stepped out and prepared herself to speak. She inhaled and steadied her voice. Dumbledore was gone. The burden of bearing bad news fell to her. "John Wick," she began. Hope flared and died in the faces turned to her. Malfoy and Daphne both looked up, desperate. McGonagall met their gaze and finished, "We have until sunset." Silence fell like a shroud. Then Malfoy erupted. "Impossible! He won't! He's John!" "Everyone dies, Malfoy," Snape said, stepping out. His voice was flat, controlled. "Stop barking." Daphne's knees buckled. Pansy and others braced her. Malfoy's agitation turned to a single, pleading demand. He asked for Daphne Greengrass. At the words, Daphne broke free and ran into the hospital wing. She burst into the room and found John barely recognizable, pale, wasted, so light that when she lifted him into a wheelchair, she hardly felt his weight. His lips moved. She put her face close and heard him whisper, faint as a breathed secret, "Our promise." They wheeled him through the castle toward the Black Lake. Students and professors followed in a somber procession. The Constellation Society surrounded him. Neville Longbottom, Draco Malfoy, Cedric Diggory, Daphne Greengrass, the four who had come together around John's charisma and iron will. He had been their forge, a leader who had shaped them, driven them, made them believe in glory and strength. They had carried his influence like a banner. Now that banner drooped. By the lake, the light thinned and the air grew cold. The last of the sun brushed the far bank and then vanished. John's eyelids fluttered as the toxins raged through him. He whispered, "It's so cold." Malfoy stripped off his own cloak and draped it over John without thinking. For a moment, seeing him so still, Malfoy's composure shattered. The others closed in, friends and housemates, professors and undergraduates, forming a ring around the boy who had taught them to aim higher. The grief was immediate and raw. Sobs spread like sparks through dry grass. Professor Flitwick dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. Professor Sprout murmured a prayer. McGonagall rested a hand on the doorframe, steadying herself as Snape's face went gray and distant. Regrets ran through the staff. Decisions reconsidered, roads not taken. "Send him back," McGonagall said finally, voice small. "He requested the Constellation Society handle his funeral," Snape replied. They all knew whom he was thinking of, the boy who had followed John into everything, the circle of friends molded by the same fire. The tragedy wasn't just that a bright star had fallen. It was that the constellation it had held together began to dim with it. Chapter 331. It made people sigh with regret. Maybe, years from now, some of them would find talented students again. But to reach John Wick's level? That seemed impossible. The Constellation Society carried John's body back. Malfoy still couldn't accept that someone as whole and alive as John could be dead just like that. "Who did it?" he growled, like a wolf who had lost its master, hunting for whoever had poisoned him. Cedric stared at John in disbelief. He could not understand how John had fallen so unprepared. Neville, who should have been the most visibly shaken, appeared the calmest of all, though they all knew it was only a temporary steadiness. Neville had been the first among them to befriend John. Ever since that train ride, their bond ran deep. If John had been in Gryffindor, the three closest friends would have been John, Neville, and Hermione. Daphne composed herself and moved to the round table, to John's place. Even the Constellation Society seemed to recognize the death of its master. The dome above had gone dim. The scattered starlight pooled into a prepared envelope that dropped onto the table. "Daphne, open it," Cedric said, looking at her. Malfoy, too, turned his eyes to her. Neville nodded. Daphne read aloud, "When this letter is opened, I am no longer able to act. It means the final opportunity has arrived, a gamble forged by life. Therefore, I demand that all members of the Constellation Society carry out the following. Percy and Fleur are in position. The Constellation Society's fireplace will lead to the Ministry of Magic. Daphne, I need you to stage my funeral under everyone's gaze. Remember, under everyone's gaze. Only then will some people believe it. Neville, Draco, take your weapons. Cedric, take my wand and go from the fireplace to the Ministry of Magic. Ginny will lead you to complete everything. One last thing, Daphne, remember our agreement." It was a plan, a sequence of things to be done. When Daphne finished, all eyes turned to her. Malfoy looked at his hand. Neville rose out of his grief. Cedric's voice was deep. "This is John's plan. We must carry it out." As his words fell, the round table opened, revealing an armory below. They descended, and cabinets inside swung open. Weapons and gear appeared. Most strikingly, 4 sets of clothing floated up, already sized perfectly for each of them. As the garments touched them, they drew on automatically. Weapons followed. Malfoy received an emerald ring and an amulet. Neville saw the sword Mavorlo come to him. A long box lowered before Cedric. Inside lay John's wand. Everything was prepared. The 3 paused before the fireplace, glanced once at the round table with emotions in their eyes, and then stepped into the flames. Everyone left, leaving only Daphne and John. Daphne stroked his gaunt cheek. His body was cold and lifeless. She remembered finding him collapsed and the promise he had made that he wouldn't get into trouble. She murmured, "If you lied to me, I will never forgive you." She carried John and staged his funeral beneath the gaze of teachers and students. The great hall was lit with white candles, each student holding one. A somber hush fell over Hogwarts. Those who had called John their protector, those who had set him as an example to follow, those who loved him, all held lit candles beneath the dim starlight. They approached John and laid white flowers on him, one after another, as if burying that gaunt, unlovely body. Only his face remained visible, black-veined and devoid of warmth. Professors stepped forward too. Perhaps they should be thankful Trelawney wasn't present. Otherwise, her grief would have been unbearable, for she had seen John as a successor. Snape placed a flower. Finally, he could be certain he had truly lost a student, an exceptional one. Regret and self-reproach would likely haunt him forever. When the 3rd years came forward, Pansy's ex-boyfriend saw that lifeless face. He suppressed the brief, triumphant curl at his lips and succeeded in appearing mournful. He had always been more calculating than most. While other students idolized John Wick, he had been planning his future. As someone who had never been valued, he resorted to extremes to climb higher. When Lord Voldemort offered an opportunity to poison John, he saw a path to power. If the plot succeeded, the payoff would be enormous. He didn't question why the Dark Lord would target a student. To a half-blood orphan like him, this was attention at last. He did not wonder why John's closest friends weren't present to protect him. Some people simply refused to accept grief. He confirmed the death and began thinking how to report it to Lord Voldemort. John's body lay bathed in the warm glow of candlelight as everyone watched. Was he truly dead? A voice, faint and unheard by anyone else, seemed to whisper. Ding. Chapter 360, Anomaly and the Ministry of Magic Thestrals. If not for their frightful looks and odd nature, would make excellent mounts. Although Hogwarts Thestrals rarely ventured far, when Harry and the others thought of the Ministry of Magic, the creatures carried them straight to the familiar entrance, that red telephone booth. A few of them squeezed inside. Harry's memory served him well. He even remembered the code he had used with Mr. Weasley when he'd visited the Ministry before. Once inside, a cold female voice spoke. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and purpose of visit." Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood. Harry rattled off. "We're here to rescue someone, unless your ministry has already done so." The mechanical voice replied briskly, "Thank you, visitor. Please take your badge and pin it to the front of your clothes." 5 badges clinked down from the coin slot, each bearing a name and the notation of a rescue mission. Clearly, the voice was automated. As the booth finished its instructions, it descended. It was fortunate they weren't like Slytherin's big oafs, Goyle and Crabbe, or they wouldn't have fit. When the booth doors opened onto the golden atrium, they found the place eerily empty. The fireplaces set into the walls had no flames. The ministry bore no signs of human life. "The Ministry of Magic wishes you a pleasant evening," the voice intoned one last time as the doors opened. The Fountain of the Golden Brotherhood murmured, but the attendant who usually monitored the foyer was gone. Harry led them through the atrium, unease growing. Even if some ministry equipment was old and creaky, the building was large. It should not be deserted like this, even near closing. They passed through the golden grills toward the lifts, and the feeling of dread intensified. The last time Harry had been here, the place had been bustling. Still, his mind remained fixed on whoever they had come to save, so he pressed the button. "Percy works here," Hermione said suddenly. "Ron said he's a workaholic. He might still be here at this hour. We don't have time for that, Harry said sharply. Hermione fell silent, and Ginny's expression tightened. Percy had always been good to Ginny. In a house full of brothers, she had been the lone sister. She watched the button for the 5th floor and memorized it silently. Luna drifted along like she always did, a little absent-minded, and Ginny felt protective. The lift arrived at the Department of Mysteries. The grills opened, and they stepped through. Chapter 332. The corridor outside was empty. At the far end stood a black door, identical to the one from Harry's dreams. He stared at it. He'd seen that door too many times over the past year. "Let's go," he whispered, afraid to startle the place into something worse. A few feet from the door, he remembered Hermione's suggestion and said, "Actually, Hermione was right. Maybe we should have someone look for Percy first, and then—" "I think that's a sensible idea," Ron said, "but I've got a question. If Percy isn't here and we get separated, how are we going to meet up?" As if reading his thoughts, Ron added, "And don't even think about abandoning us, mate." Harry looked at them, their faces steady, determined. The sudden impulse to face everything alone drained away. Hermione had been right. Sometimes he didn't stay calm enough. He wanted to do it by himself, but his friends wouldn't be left behind. Standing at the door, there was no other choice. He approached the black door, just as he had in his dream, and it opened. They stepped into a vast circular chamber. The black walls were set with dozens of identical doors, no handles, no markings. Candelabras in places held blue flames that flickered with a cold light, throwing reflections across the polished marble floor until it looked like a dark, watery surface. "Who shut the door?" Harry asked aloud, then immediately regretted speaking. Before he could say anything more, Ron pushed it closed. With the door shut, the room felt darker, the tiny blue flames the only light. Then the walls began to move. The doors, the whole circular wall, rotated. When they stopped spinning, they could no longer tell which way they had come in. They needed to keep calm. Not recognizing the entrance from his dream left them no choice but to try doors at random. One they opened led to a bright, unsettlingly ordinary room. No wavering, ghostly lights here. Just a few tables and a large glass tank set in the center, big enough for several people to swim in. The liquid inside was deep green, and many pale, pearl-white objects drifted lazily through it. "Fish?" Ginny guessed. "Wriggly maggots," Luna said. Hermione leaned in, and her face went cold. "Brains," she said. The sight of those swimming brains made the whole place queasy. "This isn't right. Let's go," Harry said. "Find another door." "Look, there are doors here too," Ron pointed out, and Harry's heart sank. The Department of Mysteries could be endless, but this room was different from what he'd dreamed. He led them back to the dark circular room. Before anyone could close the door they'd just used, Hermione raised her wand and made a mark on it to show they'd opened it. The small, clever gesture made the others look at her with renewed respect. When the door shut and the wall spun again, the mark reappeared, and they found the same door they'd come through. Harry picked another door. They followed with wands raised. This room was even larger, rectangular, with a deep stone pit in the center, about 20 feet down. Tiered stone benches rose around it like the Wizengamot courtroom. At the center of the pit stood a worn stone arch on a raised platform. A tattered black veil hung from it, swaying gently though there was no wind. "Who's there?" Harry called, stepping down along the benches toward the bottom. He thought he heard something from beyond the veil, murmurs, barely audible. "Sirius?" he asked, straining to make the words out. The sound was only whispers, confusing and distant. "Harry, please, let's go," Hermione called nervously. She began to come down toward him, but he slipped past her hand and kept moving. Her face tightened with fear. This was the Department of Mysteries. Anything could affect anyone here. Luna's odd calmness made Hermione even more uneasy. "We're here to save Sirius. Don't stand there staring at that archway," Hermione snapped, and that finally jolted Harry back. He had purpose. He turned away from the veil and saw Ginny standing where he had been. Without a word, Hermione pulled her down to safety. Ron hesitated a second, torn, but they didn't waste more time. Before they left, Hermione marked the door so they could find it again, and the wall spun. They pushed open the next door, and the familiar flickering lights flashed into view. Harry's heart leapt. They'd found it. They hurried toward another door, he'd seen in the dream, hope driving them on. Chapter 361. John's Secret and Plan. The ministry's great hall was empty. A faint blue flame burst to life in one of the wall fireplaces, and a figure stepped through. He wore a black suit cut for movement and had yellow-orange gem cufflinks. Cedric emerged first, then Malfoy, resplendent in black velvet with a silver snake looped over his shoulder and a green emerald on his little finger. And lastly, Neville, in a white shirt and black waistcoat, clutching a sword in an ornate silver and ruby sheath. When the three had gathered, another fireplace flared and a blond man in white robes slid out, a white mask concealing his face. "You're here," he said. He removed the mask. Cedric's voice dropped. "Gold." Cedric recognized him as the man they had seen at the World Cup. The white mask was part of the iconography of Johnny Silverhand's circle. "So you're one of Johnny Silverhand's," Cedric said. Gold's mouth hinted at stubble. He looked at them and shook his head. "Wrong. We all are." They blinked. Gold went on, "John is Johnny Silverhand." Malfoy's face drained of color. "That can't be," he began, then stopped, memory snagging at him. He recalled having been brought before Johnny Silverhand once. The details fuzzed. There had been talk, somehow, of godparenthood. The recollection made him uneasy. Gold's expression softened. "You haven't seen his face, have you?" he asked. Malfoy's face darkened. Neville, bewildered, managed, "If John is Johnny Silverhand, then he's more than you think," Gold said. "He began building this force as early as his second year." "You kept this from us because we were too young," Gold added. "So Percy and Fleur already knew?" Malfoy asked, struggling to accept it. "Percy learned only last year," Gold nodded. "Knowing this actually gave him protection." Cedric was quiet for a long moment before he spoke, closing his eyes. "I knew too," he said quietly. "The graveyard." The words carried a weight of pain. Gold's eyes darkened for an instant, then hardened. "Enough about John's secret," he said briskly. "We have to move forward with John's final plan." A shadow seemed to fall over them all. Malfoy's jaw clenched. "Revenge," he said. Gold said nothing more. He led them past the ministry lift. Cedric frowned as they walked. "Where is everyone?" he asked. Gold's gaze was cold. "John secured the right to use the ministry for one night," he said. "He's lured Voldemort here." "So, we're getting revenge, then?" Malfoy asked. Neville's hand tightened around the Mavorlo sword. Cedric lowered his gaze to the wand at his hip and laid a hand over the Constellation Society badge on his chest. "For John and Heinrich." The other three followed suit, pressing their badges to their chests like a clearing in a night sky, resolve hardening in their eyes. As the elevator gate closed, they descended to the lower levels. On the 5th floor of the Ministry of Magic, in Percy's office, Fleur stood composed and ready. Her hair fell like a silver waterfall down her back. She wore clothing cut for movement, a string of amulets jangling on her wrist, and a sapphire necklace resting against her pale throat. She kissed the Constellation Society badge before pinning it to her chest, then looked up at Percy. "Shall we go?" Percy rose from his chair. His voice, unusually measured, carried a warning. "Our mission is different from theirs. You should know that." "If I had known earlier that John was my commander," Fleur said with a half-smile, "perhaps I wouldn't have been tangled up in so many petty things. But this feels right. Remember, the final location will be the Hall of Death. Under no circumstances touch that archway." Percy repeated the admonition as if reciting a law. "The ministry itself doesn't fully understand it." Fleur shrugged a hand. "The more mysterious something is, the more likely it will yield unexpected results. Come, Percy." Percy already carried the bearing of someone used to authority, but with his companions he could not put on airs. He lifted a cup from the desk with a steady hand. "Very well. Let's go." There was no one else in the building tonight, so they need not hide. They took the elevator down to the Department of Mysteries. Percy watched the corridor slide by and could not keep from remembering John's words the last time they had talked. "All of this must be carried out by you, Percy," John had told him, showing him a black, lethal poison. Percy had reacted with fury and despair. He had even considered going to Dumbledore for help. But John had been relentless. "Only this way can we finish everything, Percy." He had gripped Percy's hand until it hurt. "Only you can complete my plan." "You know the ministry better than anyone," John had added. "The Department of Mysteries hides immense power, Its taboos are our hope. Percy had felt the weight of it then. When the golden cup was pressed into his hands, he knew he had no real choice. Either he failed and his companions died, or he used whatever was demanded to save them. Fleur saw it in his face and laid a calming hand on his shoulder. "John believes in you," she said. "We do too." Percy's expression shifted, and he nodded, fierce and inwardly resolved. Even if it cost him his life, he would follow the plan through. When the elevator arrived, they stepped out into a black corridor and opened the heavy door at the end. The four who had arrived earlier were already at work. Percy frowned at a scrawled mark on another door. "Who did this? If Minister Crouch sees it, there'll be a scolding." Fleur glanced at it and gave a small, approving smile. The marked door began to turn, finding its alignment with uncanny precision. Percy knew exactly where it would lead: the time room. Inside, time itself seemed visible as a pouring of golden sand. Percy produced the golden cup. Everyone assumed that John Wick and Johnny Silverhand had only harbored hatred for Lord Voldemort and had sent their disciples to hunt Death Eaters for revenge. Even Dumbledore and old Barty Crouch would have thought that. But Percy knew John's plans had never been that shallow. Simple death would never have been bait enough to compel someone like Johnny Silverhand to sacrifice himself. The danger here was more subtle and terrible. The golden sand was the power of time. To touch it brought consequences to the body, changes that could not be undone. That was why access was tightly controlled. The Ministry's laws about time turners and temporal manipulation were strict and numerous. As Percy set the golden cup into the flood of falling sand, it seemed the cup could never fill. The sand vanished as it poured in, as though absorbed into some endless hunger. One hourglass emptied, then another, and another. Percy felt like a traitor to the Ministry with every grain he accepted. Guilt twisted him. He was a Ministry official, and yet he was breaking the department's deepest rules. Fleur watched in silence. A strange vision played out in the sand. A bird flew high, aged rapidly, and dropped, transforming into an egg on impact. The eggshell cracked. A chick hatched and grew, flew up, and the cycle repeated. It was a horrifying loop, an endless repetition that made her skin prickle. One door over from the time room lay the Hall of Prophecy. 5 students had burst into that vaulted space where shelves as tall as cathedral pillars held glass orbs, each containing a sliver of fate. Harry and the others moved between the rows, the dim light of the room making everything look slightly unreal. They were farther from where Harry had seen Sirius in his dream than he wanted. The dream had pointed to row 97, but they stood near row 53 and were edging along the right-hand aisle. Harry's palms grew damp. "Wands ready," he whispered. Everyone had their wands drawn and voices hushed. They crept forward, glancing back as often as they looked ahead, hearts hammering with the fear that someone might come around a shelf and find them. Row 84, row 85. The numbers blurred as they focused on the end of each aisle. Beneath each glass orb dangled a small yellowed tag. Some orbs shimmered with a living fluidity. Others sat dull and inert. Harry strained to hear any sound, any sign of Sirius, but there was only the hollowness of the high room and the soft scrape of their footsteps. A terrible thought seized him. Sirius had been silenced, or worse, killed. He fought the image down. He could not, would not allow himself to accept that. 97, Hermione breathed at last, her voice as thin as a thread. They gathered at the end of the row and peered down the adjacent aisle. Nothing moved there but dust in a solitary shaft of candlelight. Harry's mouth was dry. "He's at the very end," he said, almost pleading. "You can't see him from here." He pushed on, leading them between the tall shelves, determined to prove the dream had not lied. "He should be around here," he muttered with each step, as if repeating it would conjure Sirius into view. "He's right here. He's close." Harry, Hermione's worry threaded through the quiet. Her words should have sounded comforting, but he bristled inwardly at the accusation that his dream had been wrong. They had already been caught in Umbridge's office because of it. His mistake had led them all into danger. He felt raw, ashamed. "Harry?" Ron called, more insistently this time. Harry, wanting to hide, looked up. Ron was not mocking or suggesting they leave. Instead, he held up a hand and pointed to an orb on the shelf. Harry stepped closer, expecting some clue Sirius might have left. The orb itself gave nothing away, but Ron nodded to the yellowed tag dangling beneath it. "Your name's on this," Ron said. Harry craned his neck to see. The tag bore a date from 16 years ago and a simple inscription, "The Dark Lord and Harry Potter." Harry stared. His name on a prophecy. Why had he never known? Ron checked the other tags around them. None of the others bore anyone they knew. Only that one. Chapter 334. "Don't touch it," Hermione said sharply when she saw Harry reaching for the glass orb. "Harry, I really don't think you should." "Why?" Harry asked, puzzled. "This thing has something to do with me, doesn't it?" "Don't touch it, Harry." Ginny's voice was firm, too. "My name's on it," Harry insisted. When his hand closed around the glass, he expected it to be icy cold, but it was warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun all day. He wanted something spectacular to happen, something to justify the long journey. So he lifted the orb down. The others gathered around. They still didn't like the idea, but now that the orb was in his hands, they had to see it. None of them noticed the shadow that fell across the doorway until a drawling voice spoke behind them. "Very good, Potter. As I suspected, you are a Gryffindor through and through." The voice was all sarcasm. "Turn around slowly. Hand it over." Dark figures had appeared all along the aisles, masked and hooded, more than a dozen wands leveled at their hearts. Harry recognized the voice, and so did everyone except Luna. Lucius Malfoy stood there, tall and pale, his long platinum hair glinting in the low light. He smiled with the cool disdain of a man used to getting what he wanted. "Give it to me, Potter," he said. Harry tightened his grip on the orb. "Where is Sirius?" he demanded. Several Death Eaters laughed. A hoarse, mad-sounding woman mimicked him in a high, taunting voice. "Where is Sirius? Where is Sirius?" Then she laughed again. Lucius did not laugh. He looked at Harry as if he were nothing. The woman at his side had a pale, ashen face and grotesque scarring below her neck, her skin marked and ruined, hair wild, nails long. Bellatrix Lestrange. Her presence made Ron flinch. "You should learn the difference between dreams and reality, Potter," Lucius said flatly. "What you saw was what the Dark Lord wanted you to see." "Don't do anything yet," Harry whispered to Ron. "Did you hear that?" One of the masked voices said. "He's ordering the children. He means to fight us." Bellatrix threw back her head and laughed, a high, terrible sound. Lucius held out his hand again. "Give me the orb, Potter, and no one will be hurt." Before he could finish, Bellatrix lashed out. "Accio, prophecy!" she cried. Harry's hand tightened on the orb of its own accord. "Protego!" he shouted. The shield flared around him. The orb slipped, nearly ripped from his fingers, but he clung to it. Bellatrix's Accio had startled Lucius so badly that he snapped. "I told you not to break it." That phrase lit something in Harry. Bellatrix, always impatient and more unhinged since Voldemort had used his arts on her, wanted results at any cost. "Seize the smallest one," she announced to the others, her voice sharp with gleeful cruelty. "Make him watch while we toy with the little girl. I'll handle Potter myself." Several Death Eaters stepped forward. Harry and the others formed a protective ring around Ginny. He held the orb up like a shield. "If you want to hurt any of us," he said, "you'll have to break this first." Bellatrix was beyond threats. "Oh, prophecy!" she screamed again. "Protego!" Hermione answered, and this time the red jet of a stupefy bolt that Bellatrix sent arced into Hermione's shield, where it glanced off and smashed into a prophecy orb on a high shelf. The glass exploded and a voice poured out of it, a voice like an old man with a white beard, speaking urgent words before the sound was lost in the chaos. "Now," it seemed to say. "No time," Harry barked. Hermione raised her wand. "Reducto! Reducto!" Ron and Ginny echoed. The wards struck the shelves. Wood splintered, and the shelves crumbled. Prophecy orbs rained down all around them. The Death Eaters' ranks broke into a scramble as falling glass and images burst in every direction. Harry and the others seized the moment and ran. Lucius spun on Bellatrix, furious. "Look what you've done," he snapped. Bellatrix laughed, ducking and weaving between the falling orbs, as if the destruction pleased her. The members of Dumbledore's army scattered to any exit they could find. Harry saw a crack where the door they'd entered through had been forced ajar. He hauled Hermione through and slammed it behind them. Hermione cast a charm and sealed it with a click. But when she turned, panic hit them both. "Where's everyone else?" Hermione cried. Only 2 people were on their side of the door. They must have taken another way, Hermione said, horror in her voice. Harry cursed quietly and was about to force the door open when he heard movement ahead. Ginny and Luna were trapped deeper in the hall. 2 Death Eaters had barred their path, one in front and one behind. Ginny squeezed Luna's hand. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I led us the wrong way." "Capture them," Lucius ordered. "Potter will hand over the orb." Lucius strode off with some of his men to find Harry. 2 adult Death Eaters would be enough, he thought, to deal with 2 girls. They closed in. "We can fly," Ginny said suddenly. "What? We can't," Ginny began, but Luna had already wrapped both arms around her waist and planted her feet. Something glinted on Luna's shoes, tiny, feathery wings, and then the soles seemed to take hold of the air. Before the Death Eaters could react, the wings beat, pushing them upward. Ginny felt the ground drop away. They were airborne. "Petrificus totalis," one of the Death Eaters shouted, red light lancing at them. The hex slid past. Luna's voice, dreamlike and oddly calm, sounded in Ginny's ear. "We're going to fly," she sang. Below them, prophecy orbs smashed into the aisles, and the wind from the little winged shoes blew pieces of glass and dust away. Ginny peered down at Luna's shoes. The laces shone, and the tiny wings flapped stubbornly. On Luna's wrists were strange wooden amulets, stoppers threaded with little wooden and shell pieces. One of the shell pieces cracked with a sound like a shell breaking. "What are those?" Ginny asked, breathless. "John gave them to me," Luna replied, twisting to dodge a curse. "They're amulets." Ginny knew enough about Arthur Weasley's odd acquaintances to realize they might be Auror equipment, emergency charms meant to buy time. At first, the aerial advantage worked. They rose and darted between the shelves, but more Death Eaters converged and more spells came at them. One by one, the tiny amulet pieces shattered under the strain. Ginny grew frightened. "Get lower! Drop down, now!" she cried. Luna adjusted and skimmed between the towering shelves, where the cover was better. For a moment it worked. Then a sudden explosion flashed beside them. The blast threw them off balance and showered them with debris. The winged shoes stuttered. They fell from high up and hit the ground hard, tumbling end over end. When they finally lay still, Luna's wrist was bare. The last wooden piece had splintered, and the amulet was gone. Chapter 335. A jet of red light struck, and Ginny darted her wand up to block it. The spell slammed into her shield and still threw her backward. She tumbled, skidding across the floor as debris grazed her face. Luna staggered to her feet and glanced at her shoes. The tiny wings attached to them beat once, torn and ragged, then disintegrated into motes of glowing dust. Her ability to fly was gone. Luna drew her wand and looked up to see a masked Death Eater materialize in front of her. "Luna!" Ginny cried. Another Death Eater had appeared nearby and was striding toward them. Ginny spat. "Expelliarmus!" Her wand flew from her hand. The Death Eater in front of Luna knocked her wand away as she raised it and shoved her to the ground. Blood welled at the corner of Luna's mouth. It looked as if the 2 girls had nowhere left to go. Suddenly, the Death Eater nearest Luna stiffened. A hand clamped on the back of his neck, forcing him to his knees. He flailed wildly, trying to reach his wand. Then there was a sickening snap as the wand broke under the force. The hand on his nape slammed him face first to the floor, leaving him unconscious. "Hello, Neville," Luna said, peering up at the newcomer. Neville rubbed his nose as if he'd been surprised mid-task. His fingers were grimy and smelled faintly of sweat from the grip. The other Death Eater noticed him and turned to attack. "Levicorpus!" Neville's voice was calm. The Death Eater's ankles were hoisted up. He sailed backward and crashed to the stone, bouncing 3 times before lying still. Malfoy smoothed his hair and glanced over at Ginny. "Are you all right?" Ginny nodded, dazed. She had never in a million years expected to be rescued by Malfoy. Neville helped Luna to her feet and handed back her wand. "This place is too dangerous," he said. "You 2 should leave." Ginny picked up her wand and, bewildered, asked, "How are you 2 here?" Malfoy's expression chilled. "None of your business." Luna peered from behind Neville as if looking for someone. "Is John here too?" she asked. Neville fell silent at the name. Luna frowned at his reaction. Before she could press the question, a Death Eater moved in, raising his wand. A streak of red shot for Neville, but Neville had already drawn the sword, and with a single brutal sweep, he cleaved the spell in 2. He crouched and charged, wand in one hand and sword in the other. The Death Eater's cloak twisted around him, but Neville severed his wand and drove the sword across the man's jaw, rendering him senseless. The difference in power was startling. Ginny watched, mouth open. None of the Gryffindors had realized Neville could be this formidable. The Death Eaters, who had been hunting them, suddenly stalled under Neville's assault. With a wand in his left hand and the sword in his right, Neville turned his back to Luna and said in a low voice, "What happens next doesn't concern you." Before he could say more, Malfoy struck down another Death Eater. Neville sheathed his silver blade without giving them a chance to ask questions, and the two of them departed together. Ginny murmured to herself, "Is this the Constellation Society's doing?" Far from them, Ron was fleeing, crawling over scattered debris, the Death Eater behind him unhurried. That attacker had been smashing the prophecy orbs as he went and didn't seem pressed for time. Ron was ducking and shielding against blows, hit several times and screaming in pain. Turning to strike again, Ron's spell was deflected. The Death Eater closed in a swirl of black smoke. "Expelliarmus," the man taunted. "Too slow," came the reply. A red beam struck Ron and contorted his body. He shrieked. "Crucio! Don't kill him," Lucius Malfoy said as he approached, dispassionate. "Perhaps we can trade him for the prophecy orb." Seeing Ron's wild hair, Lucius sneered openly. "Damn Weasley." Not kicked Ron's back as he writhed, taking perverse pleasure in the pain. A voice that made Ron's blood run cold barked, "Ha ha, little baby Potter, where are you?" It was Bellatrix. Lucius gave instructions without emotion. "Split into pairs. Round up the fleeing children. Do not kill them until we have the prophecy orb." As they moved off, Lucius cast one last pitying glance at Ron. "A bunch of children playing at battle. You're beneath us." Not hefted Ron up, preparing to drag him away. Ron's heart ached with helpless fury. They passed a row of tall shelves, and Norbert, perched nearby, stopped and cocked his head. Something watched from behind the shelves, two bright eyes tracking them. Not kept moving, and the strange eyes moved in sync, steadily gaining speed until they disappeared at the end of the aisle. Not raised his wand and fired in that direction. Stupefy. The stunning spell hit the target and passed through. Not blinked. To his shock, the person he thought he'd hit was untouched and had already raised their wand. Stupefy. Came a second, faster curse. Not was struck and crashed to the floor. Ron stared, stunned, as the mysterious figure vanished. At the same moment, Harry was encountering trouble of his own. Harry, Hermione, and the others who had slipped back into the Hall of Time had heard the chaos outside and felt panic prick at them. "What do we do?" someone whispered. Even Hermione, usually steady under pressure, found it hard to be calm. Harry's temperament steadied him. Aside from the occasional reckless streak, he had a knack for holding himself together when it mattered. "We can't just wait here until they find us," he said. "Quick, out that door." He knew that if he were captured, his friends would be in real danger. As long as he stayed free, the Death Eaters would be reluctant to kill anyone. They edged forward beneath the glittering bell-shaped glass dome, noticing the little birds inside, chirping and unharmed, a tiny baffling sign that made Harry pause for a heartbeat before he forced himself on. They hurried toward the circular foyer at the far side. They were almost there when the heavy door burst open with a crash. "Alohomora!" a rough voice barked. Harry yanked Hermione down, and the two of them flattened beneath a table. From under it, they could see the hems of Death Eater robes sweeping closer. They gripped their wands and tried to hold their breaths. "Probably went straight into the foyer," one said. "Check under the tables." The Death Eaters crouched. Harry and Hermione reacted. Wands flashed from beneath the table. "Stupefy!" Two red jets of light shot out. One hit true. The struck Death Eater flew back, struck a grandfather clock, and toppled it. The other, quicker, rolled aside and scrambled to his feet. He aimed and began to chant, a terrible word that started Avada. Harry shoved himself forward, hooking his arms around the man's knees and pulling him down. They grappled on the floor. Hermione scrambled out, wand leveled. She had a sudden bright idea. "Expelliarmus!" she shouted. Both wands flew free. Harry switched from wrestling to holding the man down while Hermione aimed for the exposed torso and fired. "Stupefy!" The red bolt hit and the Death Eater went limp, unconscious. Nice work, Hermione, Harry said, though he himself looked bruised and bloodied. The struggle had twisted his nose. Wand, Accio, he rasped. Hermione caught his wand and threw it to him. Then she murmured, Episci. Harry felt his nose pop back into place as the spell repaired the broken bridge. He pinched it reflexively, half expecting to end up with a permanently crooked nose like Dumbledore's. They dashed for the foyer exit. A red curse hissed from behind them, striking the barrier of a shield charm and dying harmlessly. Harry looked back and saw that the Death Eater they had stunned was stirring. Hermione's stunning spell hadn't been strong enough to keep him down. Chapter 336. Wood splinters rained down on Hermione, but Harry didn't care. He roared at the Death Eater, Stupefy! His magic was stronger than Hermione's, but the Death Eater ducked. The red light struck a glass display case filled with hourglasses. The case toppled, cracked, then 2 seconds later snapped back to the wall whole, only to fall and shatter again. It kept flickering between intact and wrecked. The Death Eater and Harry traded red spells, and anything they touched in the Hall of Time exploded. Hermione joined the fight. Together they drove the Death Eater back beneath a bell-shaped glass dome. Harry's stunner hit his chest. As he fell, his head struck the dome and sank into it like a bubble. Under their horrified eyes, the head shrank and smoothed, growing younger by the second. It's time, Hermione said in a voice of reverence. The Death Eater awoke with a baby's head. His mind seemed to have regressed, and he began blindly slapping at the world around him. Harry lashed out instinctively, but Hermione grabbed his arm. Don't harm a baby, she hissed. Shouts and running footsteps echoed from the Hall of Prophecy. Harry realized they had been spotted. He and Hermione bolted for the big black door at the far end. 2 Death Eaters rushed into the Hall of Time and saw them fleeing. The pair darted into a small, cluttered office and slammed the door shut, only for it to be knocked and forced. Impedimenta, 2 voices cried in unison. Harry was flung back. Hermione sat stunned but unharmed. A shield charm had risen around her, catching the blows and stunning the 2 attackers. One of the Death Eaters lunged again, wand raised, shouting, Avada! No! Harry's head was struck and stars burst behind his eyes. He roared as he saw the Death Eater level his wand at Hermione. The man's throat suddenly constricted, cutting off the spell. Harry slammed him with Petrificus Totalis, freezing him stiff. The other Death Eater fired a red bolt at Hermione. She tried to block it, but was sent sprawling. The curse bounced off. Hermione's shield charm saved her again. How many shield charms do you have? The Death Eater demanded, bewildered. He hadn't seen Hermione raise her wand. Hermione rubbed an aching elbow and glared. None of your business. Petrificus Totalis, Harry snapped, and the second attacker went rigid, collapsing on top of the first. Did you make him mute just now? Harry asked, curious. Hermione frowned. I don't know. I didn't move. She drew a wooden tag from her waistband. There's only one left. What is that? Harry asked, as they hurried toward the foyer. John gave it to me, an amulet, Hermione said, thinking of John and wondering if he had recovered. All right, Harry said seriously. We need someone to raise the alarm. I need you to go. They're after me. Hearing him, Hermione felt oddly smaller and more grown up at once. She handed him the last amulet. They pushed open the door into the foyer and saw Luna and Ginny peering out of a nearby doorway. Another door opened and Ron stumbled out, bewildered. Everyone was there. Time to run. Harry's face brightened. He only had to find the right door by its mark, but when he looked, the marks on all the surrounding doors had vanished. A door opposite crashed open and Death Eaters poured out. They're here! Dozens of red curses shot their way. Harry and the others scrambled and covered their heads, slamming into a nearby door. The whistling curses left them no room to fight back. They looked up and realized they had stumbled into the brain room. Jars and vats of floating brains lined the walls, and several doors yawned open around them. Block every door, Harry barked, slamming a charm at the one behind them. The others followed suit. They raced toward the 5th door. Luna stepped forward and spoke the opening words. The door swung wide, but a red bolt struck her in the chest, and she crumpled onto a table, motionless. Luna! Ginny screamed. 5 Death Eaters poured through. Lucius Malfoy fired a curse that struck Ginny before she could dodge. She buckled. Capture Potter, Lucius ordered, and the assault focused on Harry. On the run, Ron was hit by a spell and flew forward, face-planting. Hermione stared at the vats of slimy brains and took a desperate gamble. "Brains, come!" she shouted. "Hermione, no!" Harry tried to stop her, but it was too late. Dozens of brains crawled free of the green liquid, trailing tentacles. The Death Eaters recoiled. None wanted to touch them. Hermione ducked a writhing brain as they fled toward the only unlocked door. They were almost through when two curses streaked from behind and struck them. Harry's shield flared. Hermione was hit and fell. "Hermione!" he cried, reaching for her, but the attackers were on them. He could only seize the prophecy orb and push through the door. The Hall of Death yawned before him. He stumbled down the steps into a cavernous pit, flailing and gasping. Clambering up to a high platform, he found the Death Eaters already there, their prisoners under control. Lucius smoothed his cloak and spoke with theatrical calm. "Potter, you're finished," he drawled. "Hand over the prophecy orb, obediently." "Let the others go, and I'll give it to you," Harry shouted. The Death Eaters laughed openly. Lucius chuckled like a man amused despite himself. "Do you think you're in a position to bargain now?" he sneered. "Has Dumbledore's education made you unable to count, child fool?" Lucius studied Harry, then raised a finger. A Death Eater shoved Ron forward. Bellatrix Lestrange screamed with manic glee. Let me do it," she cried, lunging and pointing her crooked wand at Ron. "Crucio," Ron screamed immediately and rolled on the ground, writhing. "No, Ron," Harry snarled, a trapped animal. He gripped the prophecy orb as if he might smash it. "Let him go, or I'll destroy the orb." Lucius halted Bellatrix, which was exactly his intention. He advanced toward Harry with slow grace. "Give me the prophecy orb, Potter." "No, don't give it to him," Ginny cried, a wand pressed at her throat. Bellatrix yanked Ginny's hair and laughed like a lunatic. Hermione shook her head at Harry. Though a wand was at her own neck, she refused to surrender. Ron crawled toward them, groaning, "Don't give it to him, mate." Lucius, annoyed, kicked Ron in the face. Blood spouted from his nose as Lucius continued to kick, relishing the cruelty. Ron curled up, every breath agony. "You should learn to be smart, Potter," Lucius said, pushing Ron aside and closing in. "Oppose the Dark Lord and you get nothing but ruin. Aren't your parents the best example?" Harry spat back. At the mention of parents, he flipped the prophecy orb so it faced the ground and roared, "Don't come any closer." Lucius stopped, raising his hands in a mock gesture of calm. "There's a better outcome, isn't there?" he said. "Give me the prophecy orb, otherwise you'll watch your companions die horribly." To prove his point, Bellatrix slammed Ginny to the floor, hair pulled, laughing. The commotion distracted Harry just long enough for Lucius to lunge and grab the orb. They grappled for it, fingers clawing at the glass. 2 doors high above burst open. 5 people crashed into the room at once. Sirius Black led the charge, dropping from the heights with a broom of movement. His wand lashed out and struck the Death Eater, who had been holding Hermione. Tonks blasted Lucius with a stunning spell and forced him to release Harry. Harry leapt from the platform. Order members swarmed in. Lupin repelled a Death Eater near Ron. Kingsley Shacklebolt struck at Bellatrix, giving Ginny a chance to roll free. Mad-Eye Moody stood his ground against 3 Death Eaters, buying time for everyone else. Luna, unnoticed, produced a tiny crumple-horned snorkack from her pocket. It darted out and head-butted the Death Eater holding her, flinging him away. "Are you all right, child?" Moody barked, gruff concern cutting through his usual grimness. Luna blinked, holding the snorkack, which had somehow grown to the size of a fist, up for him to see. Moody looked baffled for a moment, then swung his wand to block another curse and dragged a long bench into position as a shield. "Get out of here, child," he snarled. Harry hauled Ron off the platform as silver sparks pitted the floor around them. Sirius shifted into a great black dog, bounded through the spell-strewn chaos to Harry's side, then changed back into his human shape. "Are you all right, Harry?" he demanded, breathless and fierce. "Sirius!" Harry exclaimed. "Snivellus told me you thought something had happened to me." Sirius grabbed Harry by the collar and hauled him behind him, using his own body as a shield against incoming charms from Lucius. Moody, who had just ducked a green streak of light, barked, "Stop chatting, Sirius." Tonks ran up, clutching her head and calling out, "Is it my imagination, or do they have more people?" She sent a crimson bolt at a Death Eater, and a reply flashed back from the other side. Moody, limping, muttered, "It's not your imagination. A few more Death Eaters have arrived." Harry tried to poke his head around to see where Hermione and the others were, but Moody's magical eyes spun wildly, and his hand dragged Harry back just as a silver beam passed where his neck had been. "Don't stick your head out, kid," Moody snapped, then limped off toward another skirmish. Sirius's eyes went to the high platform, and he spotted Bellatrix. "What's she doing here?" he said, stunned. When he saw Kingsley under fire, he sprinted toward him, Harry close behind. Ron lunged to grab Harry, but missed. On the far side of the platform, Lupin was being pressed by several Death Eaters. He looked dangerously outnumbered. Hermione gripped her wand and tried to help, but the onslaught was fierce. Lucius attempted to ambush Kingsley from the platform, but Sirius intercepted him. "Watch out!" Lupin shouted, and Harry heard the warning just in time to blast a would-be attacker with a stunning spell. "Nice!" Sirius laughed, catching and parrying a curse at the same time. "Well done, James," he blurted before remembering himself. Harry fell into step beside him, and together they turned on Lucius, who was straining to defend himself. Hermione helped Lupin fell another Death Eater, and Lupin nodded in approval. "Very well done, Miss Granger." "Thanks, Professor," Hermione said, grim but grateful. Just as the tide seemed to be turning, Tonks screamed. A Death Eater struck her, and she collapsed on the stone steps. Lupin, distracted, was sent flying. Moody found himself surrounded by 3 Death Eaters and was hit with an impediment jinx. The situation unraveled fast. Luna was being chased. Ginny managed a shattering spell that took a Death Eater down, but more closed in. Ron barreled in to protect Ginny, tackling one of their attackers. His face was swollen from a curse, almost pig-like. Amid the chaos, Luna spoke suddenly, as if to someone only she could see. "Are they here?" "What?" Hermione asked, and then realized Luna was talking to the small creature perched on her shoulder, the crumple-horned Snorkack. The little thing nodded and waved, gesturing in its odd, proud way. Luna's eyes shone, oddly bright. Ginny's attention snapped to Lucius on the platform. She wondered, could Draco turn on his father? A green bolt hurtled toward Luna. "Look out!" Hermione shrieked. "Poof!" said an airy voice. The green light slammed into the ground, smashing a pit where Luna had stood, but Luna herself had vanished. "Levicorpus!" a soft, ethereal voice said behind one of the Death Eaters, and his legs shot up as if someone had lifted him by the ankle. The Snorkack, still perched proudly on Luna's shoulder with its hands on its hips, emitted an unexpected little toot that somehow sent Luna tumbling back beside Ginny. Tonks, forced to the same side by attackers, called out, smiling despite herself, "What a magical little fellow." Luna replied politely, "Thank you," as she righted herself. Harry felt the battle tipping toward chaos again. Some Death Eaters were strong enough to hold their ground. Others were being driven back, but dragged the fight down with them. A charm whistled from somewhere and struck Harry's arm. His fingers loosened on the prophecy orb he had been holding, and it flew behind him. A steady hand caught it. Harry turned, expecting Lucius, and saw platinum blonde hair instead. Draco Malfoy. "Give it to me, Malfoy." Harry lunged, but Draco only glanced at him, a cruel smile crossing his face. He let the orb slip from his fingers. Glass shattered. Lucius went pale, then shouted, "Draco, protect the prophecy." His words choked off as the orb slipped and shattered on the stone. From the broken globe, a milky white shape shot out, eyes seeming grotesquely enlarged, and rose into the air. For a heartbeat, only Harry and Lucius seemed to notice that strange, pale figure. Draco kicked the fragments down the steps with the casual contempt all his own and walked slowly down, his gaze settling darkly on his father for a moment before sweeping to Harry. "Potter," Draco said, sneering, "you are not the savior." At that moment, a figure vaulted out of the dark, open doorway near the archway and landed hard between Luna, Ginny, and Hermione. Wand in one hand and sword in the other, he cut through the Death Eater's attacks like a furious lion. For a moment, Hermione blinked, then the tall, determined figure charged. Silver light flashed from the blade. One after another, a pair of Death Eaters went down, their blood mingling with the sword's bright gleam. Mist began to coil and rise around the group on the high platform. The attackers faltered, then stared as something else took shape in the archway. "Impossible!" Kingsley cried. That open black door, that passage, was a place of execution. No one should be coming out of it. Bellatrix shrieked and hurled a curse at the forming figure, but every blow made the apparition split into several images. Mirage, someone murmured, voices taut with disbelief. They're not real. Then a silver steed Patronus burst through the mist, bodily charging a Death Eater and knocking him sprawling. A Patronus, an astonished Death Eater blurted. It had the offensive force of a charger, not merely the ward Harry knew from Hog's past lessons. Harry glimpsed a handful of other, fleeting shapes moving in the mist. Patronuses and people, appearing and vanishing like glints of starlight. They're from the Constellation Society, Harry realized, breathless and disoriented. Malfoy vanished into the swirl of fog at the same moment, and a dozen new figures, those silver-buckling, hard-eyed fighters, arrived to press the attack. The battlefield had suddenly changed. The Death Eaters, who had thought themselves secure for having survived the initial hunt, found they were no longer the only ones who had answered the call. The strange mist kept producing illusions, trapping everyone inside. Figures flickered in and out of sight, Neville, Malfoy, turning the place into a new, terrifying hunt. "Don't panic, you good-for-nothings," Bellatrix shrieked, her wand aimed at a Death Eater who had already started to tremble. She threw the Cruciatus Curse. He collapsed, writhing in pain. "Slaughter them all." Lucius stood frozen, staring at the apparition of his son that had just appeared. "Draco, how could you be here?" Panic tore at him. He knew Draco had smashed the prophecy orb. If Voldemort learned it, Lucius pictured only rage. A chill ran through him. The mist seemed to help both sides. The Order of the Phoenix seized the moment to counterattack and to try to get people out. Sirius fired a charm at Bellatrix, then turned into a large black dog and began searching for his godson. Harry ran blindly through the haze and collided with Ron. "Did you see it?" Harry grabbed Ron and shook him. Ron, face swollen and dazed, blinked. "What?" "Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. He smashed the prophecy orb." "Draco Malfoy?" Ron stared. "He can't be here." Neither of them understood why Malfoy would appear, but they both knew they had to find the others. The two of them groped through the mist and soon found Ginny, Hermione, and the rest. Hermione burst out the moment she saw them. "Did you see him? Neville is here?" "Neville?" Harry's panic changed to confusion. "Wasn't it Draco Malfoy?" Both sides seemed equally bewildered. "They're all here," an ethereal, musical voice seemed to sing from nowhere. Ginny only nodded, eyes unfocused. "Luna and I met them in another room." Ron's face went slack as a remembered pair of eyes flashed through his mind. A green light darted from somewhere nearby. Harry ducked instinctively. "Let's go find Sirius." The huge black dog reappeared, changing back into Sirius in an instant. He grabbed Harry's shoulder. "Quick, take them and go." "What about the Order?" Harry demanded. Sirius's voice was hard. "Harry, go, now." Before Harry could argue, Moody burst into view, roaring and waving his wand. A flash of light hit him, and he toppled. His magical eye spun free and rolled toward Harry's feet. Harry could only see because Moody's eye tracked the others. Screams and flashes of color cut through the mist. The fighting was chaotic. Harry picked the eye up and handed it to Ron. A rush of voices seemed to pour into his head, a chorus of whispers and fragments. Hermione saw Harry acting odd and called out, worried. Harry suddenly fixed on one spot and bolted. Sirius, terrified for his godson, followed. Hermione and Ron had to lift Moody, helping him back to his feet. A Death Eater who had slipped in behind them looked delighted, until someone kicked him away and a fireball struck him, forcing a howl of pain. A newcomer's slow, cold gaze swept the survivors. "Who are you?" Hermione demanded loudly. The figure took a step back and vanished into the mist. Harry dodged a curse and sprinted toward the source of the sound. "Harry, come back!" Sirius chased him, grabbed him, and held him down. Laughter, high, manic, rang out, and a silver light struck. Hot pain spattered across Harry's face. He looked up and saw a ragged tear in Sirius's shoulder. Bellatrix. She had just slashed Sirius with a cutting charm. Harry lunged, furious, but Sirius shoved him back. Bellatrix was deranged, laughing as she advanced. She showed no care for the shattered prophecy orb. "You seem to be getting crazier," Harry spat. Sirius returned fire. Colorful charms flashed between them in a violent exchange. Two Death Eaters burst from the fog and rushed Harry, but Tonks and Kingsley dove in front of him, taking the blows. Tonks's hair flickered red. She grinned fiercely. "Your opponents are us." Kingsley's large hand pressed on Harry's shoulder, pulling him back. "Leave this to us," he whispered. The mist itself seemed to conspire. It parted to make a lane in the middle of the battlefield. Lucius and another Death Eater, Gang, stepped through. They stared at Harry with hungry, covetous expressions. Sirius, pained and desperate, barked, "Change of location." Sirius's attack combined with charms from Kingsley and Tonks, 3 bolts of light that collided and formed a shield to block incoming spells. He looked exhausted after years in Azkaban, his face lined with pain. "Moony, take Harry and get him out." "Padfoot, you must hold on," Lupin shouted. Remus lunged in, grabbed Harry, and bolted into the mist. "Sirius!" Harry roared as he was dragged away, but he couldn't break free. The chorus of voices in his head kept pulling him toward the high platform at the center of the room. His lightning bolt scar flared, pain lanced through him. "What's wrong, Harry?" Lupin asked, concerned. Harry clapped both hands to his head, then ran on. He slammed into someone and was flung aside. For a heartbeat, 2 pale lights appeared in the fog, and then the mist thickened, swallowing everything. Instinct drove him to keep running. By a stroke of luck, he avoided any more Death Eaters. The space felt wrong, small, then endless, until the mist thinned again. Where he expected to find his friends stood the high archway and the veil, hanging silently in the air. The familiar voice, soft and insistent, seemed to come from the arch itself. Harry moved toward it, step by slow step. Daphne opened her eyes. She didn't know when she had fallen asleep. Maybe it was grief. Maybe too much had happened. She was in the Constellation Society, and for a moment she thought she heard John's voice. The dull thud of something against the table made her sit up. A bottle had been left there. She picked it up. A blood-red liquid shimmered inside. The starlight under the dome brightened. Daphne extended her hand. The light gathered in her palm and formed a crystal vial. 2 bottles lay before her now. She remembered John's instructions as if he were standing there. When 2 reds appear, mix them together. She gripped both bottles and opened the crystal vial. She poured the faintly fragrant blood into the other flask. Blood met blood, swirling and solidifying into a vortex. Heat flared so fierce that a sliver of skin peeled from Daphne's slender fingers, but she wouldn't let go. Inside the clear glass, the red fire condensed, shaping itself into a beautiful bird. Back at Hogwarts, the ghosts seemed to have been infected with sadness. Today there wasn't a single ghost to be seen. The portraits and corridors felt unnaturally hushed. Normally, they were never this quiet. Chapter 339. The Slytherin candles never went out. Their small flames drifted through the air, circling like mourners holding vigil for their fallen king. Only in death, it seemed, did everyone learn to love him. Gryffindor set aside old prejudices. His courage had once bested them. Hufflepuff whispered that she sometimes saw that boy in the kitchens and the house elves sang his praises. Ravenclaw humbled her pride and sighed for his wit and talent. Severus Snape lingered by the doorway, his expression dark and unreadable. Professor McGonagall crossed the hall and paused, unsure what to say. Wreath after wreath lay in the entrance hall. Snape's attention, however, was elsewhere. "Dumbledore already knows," he said quietly. "He's gone over there." McGonagall understood at once where he meant. She had not expected that, at a moment like this, Harry would be in danger. "Aren't his friends coming?" she asked. The thought of John Wick's friends, this was another blow entirely. McGonagall feared the children might do something rash. Snape's face was shadowed by his hair. His tone was flat. "They're staying in that room." The existence of the Constellation Society was no longer a secret. Everyone tacitly acknowledged that mysterious chamber. It was like the Room of Requirement, a hidden corner of Hogwarts that revealed itself only to those who needed it. Someday, perhaps a reckless young wizard would discover that room and learn of the Constellation Society that had once met there. Firenze, the centaur who taught divination, walked out of the hall, heavy and bewildered. The reading he had seen in the stars should not have led to this. If anything, it proved that even the most skilled among them could make a mistake. McGonagall sighed. "Let's lift the curfew today, just for the final day." They should have been leaving hours ago, but no one had gone. A single day without the curfew, then. "I think our caretaker will be pleased," she added, glancing toward the foyer. Argus Filch stood there with Madame Norris, looking uncharacteristically distracted. The cat was unusually quiet, her fluffy tail draped over Filch's arm. He cradled her as he walked toward his office. Without the Weasley twins around, there was no longer the constant risk of dung bombs being thrown, and his rooms were tidier than usual. The chains and shackles he had kept carefully polished hung on the wall. On his table sat 2 boxes. He opened them. "Goodness," he muttered to Madame Norris. Inside were cat food and a new tuxedo. Only that one boy had ever thought to leave Filch gifts. Only he had ever trusted the caretaker enough to let him open a package without mockery. Only that student had given Filch a kind of dignity. Filch poured a bowl of the cat food and set it out for Madame Norris. He sat down with the tuxedo box in his hands and felt suddenly unable to hold himself together. As a squib, he had no magic, and Hogwarts had been both his refuge and his punishment, an ordinary man among wizards, resented by ghosts, scorned by the children he tried to discipline. That boy had treated him as though he mattered. He had combed Madame Norris and shared his dried fish. He had given Filch ice cream at Christmas and never mocked the squib letter Filch had received. He had handed him enchanted shoes that let him run faster than any wizard, helped him where he could, and never made a spectacle of his helplessness. Now everything was gone. There would be no more gift boxes at Christmas time. Madame Norris would not be coaxed into the yard to get her fur soft and glossy. Filch felt tired to the bone. He looked at his chains and saw them as meaningless relics of a life he had kept clinging to. In a fury, he ripped them from the wall, smashing them onto the floor with a clatter, then lay down among the scattered metal and let himself collapse. Great Hall. The Great Hall had emptied. Only John lay among the flowers, and the rest of the school kept its distance, not daring to disturb the long sleep of Slytherin's king. Daphne clutched a vial of blood-red potion so tightly it threatened to burn her palm. She knelt before John, tears in her eyes, and brushed his cheek. "Remember our promise, John?" she whispered, tilting the vial to his lips. 2 owls, one black, one white, glided into the hall and settled beside his face like ravening sentinels, reminiscent of Hugin and Munin. Daphne tipped the vial and forced John to swallow the liquid. She stepped back and pressed her hands together, reverent. "Please, John," she pleaded. "Come back." The potion flowed into John's ravaged body, crimson cutting through the black of his blood. A spark flared in his chest, then spread like wildfire. In seconds, the blaze consumed him, first his body, then the coffin, then the staff table, and the fire licked outward, swallowing the great hall. Hall of Death. Harry stood staring at the archway and was certain the sound he had heard came from beyond it. His scar throbbed with pain. Was Voldemort inside? He moved forward. The curtain fluttered without wind, soft and alive. He reached out to touch it when a furious voice screamed, "Harry, come back!" Someone grabbed his arm and jerked him away. Sirius Black burst across the smoke and confusion, risking Bellatrix's ire to pull Harry back. The mist that hung in the hall blurred sight and muffled sound. Harry's daze cleared as Sirius's hand tightened on his sleeve. Sirius's nose was bloody, and he hauled Harry onto safer ground just as a jet of red light shot past. Sirius shoved Harry forward, protecting him with his own body, and then sneered, even as he dodged. "That's not your level," he shouted. Bellatrix laughed, wild-eyed. A second curse struck Sirius in the chest. He cried out, "No!" and collapsed backward. In the slow motion of Harry's fear, Sirius's fall curved into a horrible arc, and he tumbled into the tattered curtain hanging from the archway. The worn face that emerged from the smoke was thinner than Harry remembered, lined with terror and relief mingled together. He whispered a name, "James." Then a broken, half-formed, guttural phrase, "James, your mother." Behind the curtain, a flare of firelight and a sudden, vicious boot to Sirius's left rib sent him skidding and then flying across the floor some 10 meters away. Chapter 368, John, Lord Voldemort, and Dumbledore. "Harry!" Hermione's voice cut through the chaos, but she couldn't find him. After a brief knock on the head, Mad-Eye Moody had returned to the fight. He clapped a hand on Ron's shoulder and barked, "Get out of here! Move!" "No, Harry's still here," Ron snapped, stubborn as any Gryffindor. Moody's warning was interrupted by the renewed charge of Death Eaters. The mist helped the attackers as much as it hindered the defenders, turning the fight into a blur. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look and dashed into the fog in search of Harry. Ginny hurried after them, but collided with someone as she ran. She brought her wand up instinctively, then heard a voice that steadied her like a lighthouse. "I need you all to stay by my side." She looked up and saw the old wizard she had hoped for, Professor Dumbledore, standing there, calm and immense in the middle of the storm. Chapter 340. A Death Eater who didn't realize what was happening charged forward and crashed head-on into the serene old man. Dumbledore!" he cried, then spun to run. Dumbledore waved his wand, and with a light, airy spell, he drew the man back toward him. The Death Eater never had a chance to react. The battle-hardened wizard was subdued as if by a gentle tide. This was Dumbledore's power. Ginny's eyes shone. Even Moody felt his fighting spirit swell. Like opening a blind box, Dumbledore moved through the mist with the Elder Wand, pointing here and there. Anyone who crossed him let out a terrified cry before being made harmless. Ginny's small face flushed with excitement. She and Luna made punching motions. The mist could not hide its targets from Dumbledore. He always found the Death Eaters. Soon, most of the Death Eaters in the Hall of Death were neutralized. Tonks lay unconscious. Kingsley clung on, wounded. Bellatrix fired spell after spell at the huge black dog that prowled nearby, cackling viciously. Lucius was about to finish off Kingsley when he saw the old man stroll out of the mist and stand calmly behind the Auror. Lucius immediately broke off and ran. Zhuogang followed his boss. Two other Death Eaters were slower. Kingsley struck one down, and the other was jerked backward as if snagged on an invisible line. Bellatrix, spiteful and furious, laughed like a lunatic at the chance of killing Sirius and plunged forward. The mist thinned. Harry's screams echoed. Dumbledore let go of the three fleeing Death Eaters and spun around for him. On the raised platform, Harry was despairing. Sirius was falling toward the archway and the veil. In the instant before he would disappear, Sirius's posture changed. He screamed and flung himself out of the archway. Harry froze. Shock and relief twisted his face. He could barely process whether to cry or shout. Finally, he looked at his godfather. "Oh my back, my back." Sirius lay clutching an old injury, writhing and crawling in the shadow. One place had been kicked 4 times. Who could understand? That brutal kick, horrible and merciless, had saved his life. His feelings were tangled up in pain and gratitude. "Don't run!" he heard Harry shout toward someone. He tried to rise, but the old injury and the effects of the petrificus talus he'd just suffered left him temporarily immobilized. All he could do was watch as that unlucky child, Harry, ran after Bellatrix alone, wand held high. "Harry, come back!" he cried. Harry was blinded by fury. Bellatrix had nearly killed Sirius moments ago, and he had been terrified he might lose his godfather. Sirius, teeth gritted against the pane, shouted, "Moony, stop him!" Lupin came charging in as the mist dispersed. Dumbledore fired a charm at Bellatrix, who, as one of Voldemort's most dangerous lieutenants, blocked it and returned another that struck Kingsley. Lucius scrambled and rolled toward the uppermost door. With some Death Eaters still active after the mist faded, Dumbledore had to secure them before rushing to Harry. Lupin pursued Harry, so hopefully nothing worse would happen. The Order of the Phoenix had taken heavy casualties in this fight. Even the legendary Auror Moody had been hit several times and twice lost his capacity to fight. Tonks lay out cold, and Kingsley was wounded. Sirius curled on the high platform, punching the floor as he tried to pull himself up. When Dumbledore had finished organizing the aftermath, he went looking for Harry, leaving Kingsley to control the scene. Ding! Magic blood ended. A string of system-like notifications floated in the air, clear and impossible. Received Phoenix trait blessings. Nirvana, Undying, Fire Release, Ancient. Nirvana, release Nirvana Fire to gain rebirth. Undying, increased resistance, resists most curse-type attacks. Fire Release, increased power for fire-based magic. Ancient, greatly increased lifespan. Some things you only understand after you try them. John didn't know whether he would die or be reborn, whether the system relied on his body, his soul, or his consciousness. As the sun set, he made a decision no one had ever dared. He killed himself. It was a gamble, an experiment to see whether the system's hold was on the flesh or something else. He crafted a self-made charm, spoke to his soul and drew it out, hiding it in the Constellation Society. At sunset, his body died, and his soul returned to the constellation. Then he gained the precarious ability to move between worlds. His body was pulled by a force toward leaving Hogwarts. Once the system settled, he let go of the restraints. He'd always been curious about that boundary between life and death. He had read every book on the subject in Hogwarts library and hunted down rarer texts in other collections, everything about the afterlife and the archway that seemed to connect to it. When John stepped into the Hall of Death, he realized he had been there before, though he had no memory of it. He had walked through death. The memories of that walk remained in the realm of the dead. His soul, cloaked in flame, reshaped his body as it crossed the doorway. When life returned, like a phoenix undergoing nirvana, he reformed. From embryo to human, a long, aching rebirth. The passage was blurred. He experienced things in that other world, but could not carry them back fully. James, where are you and your mum? John had just returned from death and brushed away the man who'd been blocking his way. The sensation of the kick, it was familiar. Then a scream cut through. Harry. Right. Harry was at the Ministry of Magic. John stepped out, and something tried to stop him. But the force recoiled when it touched the nirvana flames around him. I think we'll meet again, he said with a smile to whoever heard. He did not know who he addressed, but he stepped out of the archway anyway. Harry, wait for me, he called. Sirius had struggled for a long time before he managed to stand. Kingsley was healing wounds with a charm. Tonks stirred awake. Hermione and Ron, worried, chased after Harry. When the mist cleared, calm seemed to return. Sirius, behind you, Tonks said without thinking, her voice shaking. Sirius stiffened. There's someone behind me, isn't there? He asked, and slowly turned. A familiar face was there. It seems we meet again. Flames clung to John's skin, then gradually faded to reveal him whole. He was naked, rubbing his neck and sighing. This feeling is wonderful. Everyone stared. The last of the mist rose again, and when it dispersed, 6 more people stood with John. Ginny had handed him a small handbag. He patted it, and clothes flew out to dress him. He raised his right hand, and Fleur glided over, placing a silver ring on his finger. On his left, Cedric offered his wand. Malfoy came up with an odd expression, gripping John's right hand so tightly his face went gray, on the brink of tears. You never told me you were Johnny Silverhand, he blurted. John shrugged. I couldn't exactly tell you I was your godfather, could I? Malfoy's face darkened. I didn't agree to that back then, he snapped. If I hadn't refused, John replied in mock surprise, do you think your agreement would have made a difference? The words stung. Malfoy looked wounded, and for a moment it seemed they wouldn't see each other again.